Hermione cast her first spell at age 9 and it created an unbreakable soul bond with Harry Potter forever. Chapter 1. The connection. The playground was empty save for 3 figures huddled near the swing set. 2 larger silhouettes towered over a smaller one, their shadows stretching across the pavement in the late afternoon sun. 9-year-old Hermione Granger clutched her book to her chest as Amanda Wilson and Bethany Peters circled her like vultures. "Think you're so clever, don't you?" Amanda snatched the book from Hermione's hands. "Advanced Mathematics for Secondary Students." "You're such a freak, Granger." Hermione reached for her book, her wild brown curls bouncing as she jumped. "Give it back. It doesn't belong to you." "What are you going to do about it?" Bethany pushed Hermione's shoulder, sending her stumbling backward. "Tell the teacher? Run to your mummy and daddy?" "Nobody likes a know-it-all," Amanda sneered, flipping through the pages. "No wonder you don't have any friends." Hermione's lower lip trembled, but she refused to cry. Not in front of them. Never in front of them. She'd endured their taunts for 2 years now, ever since she'd corrected Amanda's answer in class and the teacher had praised her instead. "I said, give it back." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Amanda laughed and held the book higher. "Come and get it then." What happened next occurred so quickly that none of them had time to process it. As Hermione reached up, a strange warmth flooded through her fingertips. The air between her and Amanda seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from pavement on a summer day. The book suddenly wrenched itself from Amanda's grip with such force that it flew past Hermione entirely, landing in the grass several meters away. For a moment, all 3 girls stood frozen in shock. "What?" Amanda began, her face draining of color. "What did you do?" Hermione stared at her own hands in disbelief. "I don't know." "Freak!" Bethany shrieked, grabbing Amanda's arm. "She's a witch or something. Did you see that? The book it flew." "Stay away from us, you freak." Amanda backed away, her previous confidence evaporating. "Come on, Beth. Let's go." As they ran off, Hermione remained rooted to the spot, her heart hammering in her chest. What had just happened? How had she done that? Because somehow, she knew she had done it, that the strange force had come from her. The warmth in her fingers intensified suddenly, spreading up her arms and throughout her body. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like being submerged in a hot bath after coming in from the snow. She gasped as a tingling sensation traveled up her spine and bloomed behind her eyes. For a fleeting moment, Hermione Granger wasn't standing in the playground anymore. She was staring at a cracked ceiling, lying on a small cot in what appeared to be a cupboard. A large spider crawled across a beam above her. She could feel stiff sheets beneath her fingers and sense profound loneliness, so deep and familiar it felt like a constant companion. Then, just as suddenly, she was back in the playground, stumbling as the connection broke. Hermione sank to her knees, breathing hard, unsure what had just happened but certain it wasn't normal. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this, not her books on science, not her parents' rational explanations of the world. As her breathing steadied, she crawled over to retrieve her mathematics book, brushing dirt from its cover. She would go home and pretend nothing had happened. She would not tell her parents that she had somehow made a book fly, or that for a split second, she had been somewhere else entirely, seeing through someone else's eyes. Because if she did, they might think she was exactly what Amanda and Bethany had called her, a freak. What Hermione couldn't possibly know was that at that exact moment, hundreds of miles away in Surrey, a skinny boy with untamable black hair and bright green eyes had experienced something equally strange. For a brief instant, 9-year-old Harry Potter had found himself staring at 2 retreating girls on a playground, feeling a confusing mix of hurt, fear, and triumph that seemed to come from somewhere outside himself. The bond had been forged. Harry Potter sat up in his cupboard under the stairs, rubbing his eyes in confusion. The strange vision had come and gone so quickly he might have thought he'd imagined it, except for the lingering feelings that weren't his own. Fear mixed with an odd sense of satisfaction, like he'd won something despite being afraid. But that made no sense. He hadn't won anything. He'd spent the afternoon weeding Aunt Petunia's garden, his back aching and his hands raw. Uncle Vernon had locked him in his cupboard for tracking dirt inside, shoving him roughly and muttering about ungrateful brats. Yet the foreign emotions persisted, like an echo in his mind. "Boy!" Uncle Vernon's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Stop that racket in there." Harry hadn't made a sound, but he knew better than to argue. "Sorry, Uncle Vernon," he called back softly. He lay back down on his cot, staring at the cobwebs. Something had changed, he couldn't put it into words, but he felt it. Like a window had opened in a room that had always been sealed. Like someone, somewhere, had called his name, even though he hadn't actually heard anything. Harry closed his eyes, trying to recapture the vision. A playground. Two mean-looking girls walking away. A book on the ground. And feelings, hurt from their words, but also something powerful, something that made them run away scared. Without understanding why, Harry smiled. Whoever that other person was, they had stood up for themselves. They had power the bullies didn't expect. Unlike him. He turned onto his side, curling up to make himself smaller, a habit formed from years of trying to take up less space in a world where the Dursleys made it clear he wasn't wanted. As he drifted toward sleep, a new sensation washed over him, curiosity that wasn't his own, probing gently at the edges of his consciousness. "Hello?" Harry whispered into the darkness, feeling foolish even as he did so. There was no answer, of course. Just the faint sounds of the television in the living room where Dudley was undoubtedly watching his favorite show. But something had shifted in Harry Potter's lonely existence, though he wouldn't understand what it was for a long time to come. Hermione sat at her desk, her schoolwork spread before her, untouched. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the playground, and strange things kept happening. She'd wake from dreams that didn't feel like her own, dreams of a large, angry man shouting, of a horse-faced woman sneering, of a boy the size of a small whale laughing cruelly. She'd feel flashes of hunger when she'd just eaten, or sudden, inexplicable relief when she'd been stressed all day. And sometimes, in quiet moments, she'd swear she could hear breathing that wasn't her own. She'd done research, of course. That was her solution to everything: find a book, look for answers. The school library had yielded nothing useful on spontaneous object movement or mysterious connections. The public library had some books on telekinesis and psychic phenomena, but they seemed more like fantasy than fact. Her parents had noticed her distraction. Last night at dinner, her mother had asked if she was feeling well. "You've been so quiet lately, sweetheart," Catherine Granger had said, reaching across the table to feel Hermione's forehead. "Are you coming down with something?" Hermione had shaken her head. "I'm fine, Mum. Just thinking about school projects." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been thinking, obsessively, about what had happened, trying to understand it through the lens of science and reason, the frameworks her dentist parents had instilled in her from an early age. But science and reason offered no explanations for books that flew on their own or visions of cupboards she'd never seen. A sharp pain in her hand jolted her from her thoughts. Phantom pain, that's what she'd started calling these sensations. She looked down at her palm, half expecting to see a cut or bruise, but her skin was unblemished. Somewhere, she thought, someone else was hurt. Someone connected to her. Hermione pushed back from her desk and walked to her bedroom window, looking out at the darkening sky. "Who are you?" she whispered, not expecting an answer but feeling compelled to ask anyway. To her shock, a wave of surprise that wasn't her own washed over her, followed by cautious curiosity. She gasped, stepping back from the window. Was that a response? Gathering her courage, Hermione closed her eyes and concentrated. She tried to project a single thought outward, focusing on it with all her might. Can you hear me? The reply wasn't words exactly, but a feeling, confused acknowledgement, like someone nodding hesitantly in the dark. Hermione's heart raced. This was real. She wasn't imagining it. Somewhere out there, someone was connected to her mind. She should have been terrified. Any rational person would be. But Hermione Jean Granger, age 9 3/4, felt something entirely different: exhilaration. For the first time in her life, she had found something that couldn't be explained by any of her books. Something magical. And for the first time in her life, she felt less alone. Over the next several months, Harry and Hermione developed an unspoken routine. Neither fully understood the connection between them, but they learned to recognize the moments when it strengthened, usually during heightened emotions or just before sleep. They couldn't communicate in words, exactly. It was more like impressions, emotions, and occasionally flashes of vision when the connection was particularly strong. Harry would sometimes find himself looking down at pages of a book he wasn't reading, the words far more advanced than anything he'd study at school. Hermione would feel sudden bursts of pain or hunger that made no sense given her comfortable home life. For Harry, the connection became a lifeline. Living with the Dursleys had always been miserable, but now he had proof that someone else knew he existed. Someone who seemed to care when he was hurt or afraid. The Dursleys could lock him in his cupboard, but they couldn't cut this invisible thread that connected him to someone who seemed to understand loneliness as well as he did. For Hermione, the connection was both fascinating and frightening. She'd always been methodical, organizing her world into neat categories. This defied categorization. It wasn't explainable through any scientific principle she knew. Yet she couldn't deny it was happening, and more than that, she didn't want it to stop. One night in December, nearly 6 months after the connection had formed, Hermione lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Snow fell gently outside her window, her room warm and comfortable with its bookshelves and soft lavender walls. She felt a now familiar presence at the edges of her awareness, her mysterious friend. As she'd begun to think of him, somehow she knew it was a boy, though she couldn't have explained how. Tonight, his presence felt heavier than usual, tinged with a sadness so profound it made her own eyes well with tears. She focused on the connection, trying to send comfort across whatever distance separated them. "What's wrong?" she tried to ask, knowing he wouldn't hear words but hoping the sentiment would reach him. In response, she received a jumble of impressions: a Christmas tree twinkling with lights, a large boy tearing open presents, a skinny dark-haired boy watching from a doorway, the sharp sting of exclusion. Hermione's heart ached. Without thinking, she reached for her bedside drawer and pulled out a small notebook and pen. She began to write, describing her own Christmas traditions, how her father always read A Christmas Carol on Christmas Eve, how her mother baked gingerbread that filled the house with spicy sweetness, how they would drive to her grandmother's house on Christmas Day and exchange gifts by a fire. She knew he couldn't read her words, but somehow it felt important to document this, to acknowledge him. When she finished writing, she closed her eyes and tried with all her might to send feelings of warmth and inclusion across their strange bond. "You're not alone," she thought fiercely. "I see you." Miles away in Little Whinging, Harry Potter lay on his cot in the cupboard under the stairs, listening to the Dursleys' Christmas party through the slats in the door. Aunt Petunia had made him wash all the good china before banishing him to his cupboard for the evening, warning him not to make a sound while their guests were present. He'd watched Dudley showing off his mountain of early Christmas gifts to his friend Piers Polkiss, knowing that tomorrow, on actual Christmas, Dudley would receive twice as many presents while Harry would be lucky to get a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks. The loneliness had been crushing until he'd felt it, that now familiar presence that somehow made him feel less alone. Warmth flooded through him, not physical warmth in his cold cupboard, but something deeper. Images came to him: a cozy living room with a modest tree, a kind-faced woman baking in a kitchen, a fire crackling in a hearth. For reasons he couldn't explain, Harry found himself reaching for a broken crayon and a scrap of paper he'd salvaged from Dudley's trash. He drew a crude picture of himself sitting by a Christmas tree, something he'd never actually experienced. When he finished, he tucked the drawing under his thin pillow and curled up under his blanket. "Happy Christmas," he whispered to no one and everyone. "Whoever you are." He fell asleep with a small smile on his face, feeling, for perhaps the first time in his young life, that someone had wished him a happy Christmas in return. The day Hermione Granger's life changed forever began like any other. She sat at the breakfast table, reading while she absently ate her porridge. Her father lowered his newspaper to smile at her. "Any plans for today, pumpkin?" Richard Granger asked, reaching for his coffee. Hermione looked up from her book. "I thought I might go to the library. They've got some new books on astronomy I wanted to check out." What she didn't say was that her connection to the mysterious boy had given her strange dreams last night, dreams of stars and flying motorcycles. She'd woken with an inexplicable urge to learn more about the night sky. Her mother placed a glass of orange juice beside Hermione's bowl. "That sounds lovely, dear. Just be home for lunch. We're expecting a visitor." "A visitor?" Hermione raised an eyebrow. They rarely had unplanned visitors. "Yes," Catherine said, exchanging a glance with her husband. "A professor from a school that's interested in you." "In me? What school?" Her father folded his newspaper. "That's the thing, Hermione. We're not entirely sure. We received a rather unusual letter yesterday after you'd gone to bed." The professor insisted on explaining in person. A flutter of nervousness passed through Hermione, followed immediately by a wave of reassurance that wasn't her own. Her invisible friend, sensing her discomfort. She'd grown so accustomed to these exchanges that she barely registered them anymore. "All right," she said slowly. "I'll be back by noon." As Hermione walked to the local library, her mind raced with possibilities. What kind of school would send a professor to speak to a 10-year-old? She was advanced for her age, certainly, but not so exceptional that schools would be recruiting her. Unless... A wild thought occurred to her. What if this had something to do with the strange things that had been happening to her? The flying book hadn't been an isolated incident. Last month, she'd been frustrated with a particularly difficult math problem and somehow, the pencil in her hand had snapped in two without her applying any pressure. And just last week, her hair, which she'd always wished was less bushy, had seemed to smooth itself temporarily when she was getting ready for a family photo. Could there be others like her? People who could do unexplainable things? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. At the library, Hermione could barely focus on the astronomy books. She kept checking the clock, watching as the minutes ticked closer to noon. By 11:30, she gave up the pretense of reading and returned the books to their shelves before heading home. As she approached her house, she noticed a peculiar figure walking up the garden path ahead of her. A tall, severe-looking woman in what appeared to be a long emerald cloak, her black hair pulled into a tight bun. Despite the warm July weather, the woman wore what looked like several layers of outdated clothing. Hermione quickened her pace. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you here to see the Grangers?" The woman turned, surveying Hermione with sharp eyes behind square spectacles. "I am indeed. And you must be Miss Granger." "Yes, I'm Hermione." She extended her hand politely, the way her parents had taught her. "Are you the professor my parents mentioned?" "Professor Minerva McGonagall." The woman shook Hermione's hand with a firm grip. "Deputy headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Hermione blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, did you say witchcraft and wizardry?" A hint of a smile touched Professor McGonagall's stern lips. "I did indeed, Miss Granger. I believe we have quite a lot to discuss with your parents." Inside, the Grangers sat in stunned silence as Professor McGonagall explained the magical world, Hogwarts, and most importantly, that Hermione was a witch, a Muggle-born witch with considerable magical potential. The incidents you've experienced, objects moving without explanation, things changing unexpectedly, these are manifestations of your magical ability, Professor McGonagall explained. Particularly in young witches and wizards who haven't been trained, magic often emerges during moments of heightened emotion. Hermione's mind raced back to that day on the playground, the moment when Amanda had taunted her and the book had flown from her grasp. Magic. She had performed magic. But that's not possible, Dr. Richard Granger stammered. Magic isn't real. It's stories and fairy tales. Professor McGonagall fixed him with a pointed look before transfiguring the coffee cup on the table into a small bird that flew around the room before returning to the table and becoming a cup once more. Catherine Granger gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard simply stared, his face pale. I assure you, Dr. Granger, magic is quite real, McGonagall said calmly. Your daughter has been blessed with this ability, and at Hogwarts, she will learn to control and channel her powers properly. As her parents peppered the professor with questions about safety, curriculum, and logistics, Hermione remained quiet, processing this revelation. Magic. She was magical. Suddenly, so many things made sense, not just the strange incidents, but the connection too. Could her invisible friend be magical as well? Professor, Hermione finally spoke up during a lull in conversation, are there other kinds of magic? Like, connections between people? Sensing someone else's feelings or seeing through their eyes sometimes? Professor McGonagall's attention sharpened considerably. What exactly do you mean, Miss Granger? Hermione hesitated, suddenly afraid she'd said too much. But this was her chance to understand what had been happening to her for nearly 2 years now. Since I was 9, I've had this connection with someone I've never met. I feel their emotions sometimes, or see bits of their life. Is that normal for witches and wizards? The room fell silent. McGonagall's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something like cautious interest. No, Miss Granger, that is not common at all. In fact, magical connections of the kind you're describing are extremely rare. She leaned forward slightly. Can you tell me when exactly this started? And was there a particular magical incident that might have occurred just before? Hermione described the playground incident in detail, the bullies, the book flying, and the strange warm sensation that had flooded her body afterward. She carefully omitted details about the boy's living conditions, feeling strangely protective of his privacy. A spontaneous bond, McGonagall murmured, almost to herself. Formed through untrained magic during emotional distress. I've read of such things, but... Is it dangerous? Catherine asked, reaching for her daughter's hand. Should we be concerned? Professor McGonagall seemed to choose her words carefully. Not dangerous, precisely, but certainly unusual. Such connections typically only form between magically compatible individuals, and usually through deliberate spell work, not accidentally. She turned her attention back to Hermione. Do you know anything about this other person? Their name or location? Hermione shook her head. No, nothing specific. Just feelings, really. And sometimes glimpses of where they are or what they're doing. I see. McGonagall straightened her already impeccable posture. Miss Granger, when you arrive at Hogwarts, I would like you to speak with the headmaster about this. Professor Dumbledore is far more knowledgeable about rare magical phenomena than I am. She reached into her cloak and produced an envelope made of heavy parchment, addressed in emerald green ink. Miss H. Granger, the 2nd bedroom, 15 Heathview Road, Hampstead, London, your official acceptance letter, Professor McGonagall said, handing it to Hermione. Term begins on September 1st. All the details about where to purchase your school supplies are included. As Hermione took the letter with trembling hands, she felt a surge of excitement that wasn't entirely her own. Somewhere far away, her invisible friend seemed to be experiencing a similar moment of wonder and possibility. For the first time, she wondered if she might actually meet him at this magical school. Harry Potter stared at the giant man standing in the doorway of the tiny hut on the rock, unable to process what he was hearing. A wizard. He, Harry Potter, was a wizard. "I'm a what?" he stammered. "A wizard, oh, course," said Hagrid, sitting back down on the sofa, which groaned and sank even lower, and a thumpin' good un, I'd say, once ye've been trained up a bit. With a mum and dad like yours, what else would ye be?" Harry's mind reeled. Magic was real. His parents hadn't died in a car crash. He was famous in a world he didn't know existed. It was too much to take in all at once. But underneath the shock and confusion, something else stirred, a sense of rightness. As if a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. For years now, he'd experienced strange moments of connection with someone he'd never met. Feeling emotions that weren't his own. Occasionally seeing flashes of a life very different from his miserable existence with the Dursleys, a loving home, parents who cared, shelves lined with books. He'd never mentioned it to anyone, of course. The Dursleys would have locked him in his cupboard for a month if he'd talked about mysterious connections and shared emotions. They already thought he was enough of a freak. But now, if magic was real, could that connection be magical too? As Hagrid argued with Uncle Vernon and eventually produced his Hogwarts acceptance letter, Harry felt a familiar presence at the edge of his awareness, his invisible friend, as he'd come to think of them. Their emotions felt different tonight, excited, but also somehow knowing. As if they understood what was happening to him. The realization hit him suddenly, his friend was magical too. "Hagrid," Harry said hesitantly, after his uncle had retreated in fear from Hagrid's umbrella, "are there ways that wizards can connect? Like, feel what someone else is feeling even when they're not together?" Hagrid looked surprised by the question. "Well, there's some powerful magic that can link minds, but it's dead complicated. Not something yet learned till much later at Hogwarts, if at all." "Why d'ya ask?" Harry shrugged, suddenly shy. "Just curious about what's possible with magic." The truth was too personal, too precious to share just yet. For years, this mysterious connection had been his only comfort in the Dursleys' home. If his friend was also going to Hogwarts, maybe they would finally meet. As Harry settled into Hagrid's coat on the floor of the hut, listening to the storm rage outside, he felt more hopeful than he could ever remember feeling. Not only was he escaping the Dursleys, but he might finally discover who had been sharing his thoughts and feelings all this time. "I'm going to Hogwarts," he thought as forcefully as he could, trying to project the message across whatever invisible tether connected them. "Are you going too?" Just before sleep claimed him, he felt a surge of joy and confirmation that wasn't his own, and he smiled in the darkness. The morning of September 1st dawned crisp and clear. Hermione had been packed for 3 days already, her trunk containing neatly arranged schoolbooks, robes, and supplies. She'd read all her textbooks twice, practiced a few simple spells with her new Vinewood wand, and memorized Hogwarts, a history almost cover to cover. Her parents drove her to King's Cross Station, both trying to hide their anxiety behind encouraging smiles. "Remember to write at least once a week," her mother said, smoothing Hermione's unruly curls. "And if you want to come home at any point, just let us know." "I'll be fine, Mum," Hermione assured her, though her own stomach fluttered with nerves. Professor McGonagall explained everything. "I just need to find platform 9 3/4. Her father chuckled nervously. "Still can't quite believe that's a real place." They made their way through the crowded station, Hermione pushing her trolley with determination. When they reached the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, she hesitated, remembering McGonagall's instructions to walk straight through. "Well," she said, turning to her parents, "this is where we say goodbye, I suppose." Catherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "We're so proud of you, Hermione. This is a whole new adventure." Hermione hugged them both tightly, then squared her shoulders. "I'll see you at Christmas." With one last wave, she turned toward the barrier, took a deep breath, and pushed her trolley forward. Just before closing her eyes for impact, she glimpsed a family of redheads nearby, the mother speaking about muggles and platform 9 3/4. Then she was through, opening her eyes to the magnificent sight of a scarlet steam engine waiting at a platform packed with people. A sign overhead said Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. She had made it. After saying a final goodbye to her parents, who had followed her through the barrier with expressions of wonder, Hermione dragged her trunk toward the train. A porter helped her load it, and she found an empty compartment near the middle of the train. As she settled into her seat, that familiar presence in her mind seemed stronger than it had in weeks. Her invisible friend was close, very close. The realization sent her heart racing. After nearly 2 years of this strange connection, would she finally meet him today? She tried to send a questioning thought, "Are you on the train?" A confusing jumble of emotions came back, anticipation, nervousness, and what felt like agreement. He was here somewhere, maybe looking for her just as she wanted to find him. The train began to move, and Hermione decided to search the compartments. She would know him when she saw him, she was certain of it. Rising from her seat, she straightened her already neat clothes and stepped into the corridor. She had only gone past a few compartments when she encountered a round-faced boy who looked close to tears. "Sorry," he said when she nearly bumped into him, "but have you seen a toad? Trevor's got away from me again." "No, I haven't," Hermione replied. "But I can help you look if you'd like." The boy's face brightened slightly. "Would you?" "I'm Neville Longbottom." "Hermione Granger." "Let's start at the front of the train and work our way back." As they searched compartment after compartment with no sign of Trevor, Hermione felt increasingly distracted. The presence in her mind was fluctuating, sometimes feeling closer, sometimes farther away, as if they were circling each other without meeting. Finally, near the end of the train, they slid open a compartment door to find 2 boys surrounded by a pile of sweets. One had vivid red hair and freckles, the other was thin with messy black hair and glasses hastily repaired with tape. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "Neville's lost one," Hermione said. "We've already told him we haven't seen it," said the red-headed boy. But Hermione barely heard him. Her attention had fixed on the dark-haired boy, whose bright green eyes had widened at the sight of her. A jolt of recognition surged through their connection, so powerful it nearly took her breath away. It was him. Her invisible friend. The one she'd been connected to for almost 2 years. Harry Potter stared at the bushy-haired girl in the doorway, unable to speak. The moment she'd appeared, the connection that had lingered at the edge of his awareness for years had exploded into full focus, like a radio suddenly tuned to the right frequency. He knew her, had always known her, somehow, even though they'd never met. "Holy cricket," Hermione whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're him." Ron Weasley looked between them in confusion. "Him who?" Neither Harry nor Hermione answered. They were too busy experiencing the strangest sensation, like puzzle pieces clicking into place, like coming home after a long journey, like finding something precious that had been lost. "I'm Hermione Granger," she finally said, extending her hand without taking her eyes off Harry. "Harry Potter," he replied, reaching out. When their hands touched, a spark of golden light briefly flashed where their skin met. They both pulled back in surprise, but not before a wave of warmth had traveled up their arms and spread throughout their bodies. "What the bloody hell was that?" Ron exclaimed, jumping slightly in his seat. Neville's eyes had grown as round as saucers. Did you see that light?" Hermione recovered first. "Static electricity," she said briskly. "It happens all the time in the Muggle world. Nothing to worry about." But her eyes told Harry a different story as they darted meaningfully toward the corridor. He understood immediately. "I think I'll help look for the toad," Harry said, standing up. "I'll be back in a bit, Ron." Ron shrugged, already reaching for another chocolate frog. "Suit yourself." In the corridor, Harry and Hermione moved away from the compartment, finding a small alcove where they could talk privately. For a moment, they just stared at each other, taking in the physical reality of a person they'd only known through fleeting impressions and emotions. "It's really you," Harry said finally. "I've felt you for almost 2 years," Hermione finished. "Since I was 9. There were these girls bullying me, and I accidentally made a book fly, and then suddenly, you were there. In my head." Harry shook his head in wonder. "I thought I was going mad at first." "Me too. I researched everything I could think of, telepathy, twin studies, psychological phenomena, but nothing explained it." Hermione's words tumbled out rapidly. "And then Professor McGonagall came to my house and told me I was a witch, and I asked her about magical connections, and she said they exist but they're incredibly rare, and we should talk to the headmaster about it when we breathe," Harry said with a small smile, instinctively placing a hand on her arm. The touch sent another, gentler wave of warmth between them, and they both felt the connection strengthen. It was like a door that had been barely ajar was now wide open. "Sorry," Hermione said, blushing slightly. "I talk a lot when I'm nervous." "I know," Harry replied without thinking. "I've felt it. When you're anxious about something, it's like your thoughts race faster." They looked at each other in wonder, realizing just how deeply this strange bond had allowed them to know each other. "You live with your aunt and uncle," Hermione said softly. "They're horrible to you. They made you sleep in a cupboard." Harry nodded, a lump forming in his throat. No one had ever known that about him, no one had ever cared enough to notice. "And you live with your parents," he said. "They're dentists. They love you, but they don't always understand why you prefer books to people." Hermione's eyes widened. "How much do you know about me?" "Not facts, exactly. Just feelings. Impressions. Sometimes I'd see flashes of what you were seeing." Harry hesitated, then added, "You were the only good thing in my life sometimes. Knowing you were out there. Feeling what it was like to be cared about." Tears welled in Hermione's eyes. "I felt so alone before. The other children thought I was strange, too smart, too different. But then suddenly I wasn't alone anymore." They stood in silence for a moment, processing the enormity of finally meeting face to face. "We should get back before they come looking for us," Hermione said eventually. "But Harry, we need to figure out what this means." "Why us? Why did this happen?" Harry nodded. "McGonagall said we should talk to Dumbledore?" "Yes, but..." Hermione bit her lip. "I think maybe we should wait. Learn more about the magical world first. If this connection is as rare as she implied, we might draw a lot of attention." "Attention is the last thing I need," Harry agreed, thinking of the stares and whispers that had followed him in Diagon Alley. "For now, it can be our secret?" Hermione smiled, and Harry felt her relief and agreement through their bond before she even spoke. "Our secret." They rejoined Neville, continuing the search for Trevor as a cover for their conversation, both processing the momentous realization that they had finally found each other. Neither could have imagined just how significant their bond would prove to be in the years ahead. The Great Hall was even more magnificent than Hermione had imagined from her reading. Thousands of candles floated in midair over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers sat. Professor McGonagall led the first years to the front, where she placed a 4-legged stool. On top of the stool she put a pointed wizard's hat, patched, frayed, and extremely dirty. When the Sorting Hat began to sing, Hermione wasn't even surprised. After everything she'd experienced in the past few months, discovering she was a witch, learning about Hogwarts, and most importantly, finally meeting Harry, a talking hat seemed almost ordinary. Through their connection, she could sense Harry's mixture of awe and nervousness. Standing a few feet away from her in line, he caught her eye and gave a small smile. She returned it, sending a wave of reassurance his way. "You'll be fine," she thought, hoping the sentiment would reach him. His slight nod told her it had. As Professor McGonagall began calling students forward alphabetically, Hermione's own nerves intensified. What if they were sorted into different houses? Would that weaken their bond? Granger, Hermione. Taking a deep breath, Hermione practically ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly onto her head. My, what have we here?" said a small voice in her ear. "Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh yes, and a thirst to prove yourself. But what's this? A soul bond, already formed? How extraordinary." Hermione tensed. "Please don't tell anyone," she thought desperately. "Your secret is safe with me, Miss Granger. Now, where to put you? With a mind like yours, it's clear, Gryffindor." The last word was shouted to the entire hall. Hermione took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table, casting a backward glance at Harry, who gave her a thumbs up. As more students were sorted, Hermione found herself holding her breath when Potter, Harry, was called. The hall broke into whispers at his name, and Hermione could feel Harry's discomfort through their bond. The hat took longer with Harry than it had with her. Through their connection, she sensed conflict, as if he were arguing with the hat. Finally, it shouted, "Gryffindor," and Hermione found herself clapping wildly with the rest of her new house as Harry made his way to their table. He slid into the seat beside her, and immediately their bond hummed with shared relief. "It wanted to put me in Slytherin," he whispered to her. "But I asked for Gryffindor." Hermione's eyes widened. "You can choose. It said I could do well in Slytherin, but I'd heard some things." Harry glanced toward the Slytherin table, where a pale blonde boy she recognized from the train was watching them with narrowed eyes. "And I felt how much you wanted us to be together." She blushed, realizing her thoughts had been transparent to him. "I was worried about what would happen to our connection if we were separated." "Me too," Harry admitted. "It's the first time I've ever really belonged anywhere. I didn't want to risk losing that." As the feast appeared before them and the great hall filled with chatter, Harry and Hermione fell into easy conversation with their housemates, but beneath it all ran a current of awareness that something momentous had happened today. They had found each other, and somehow, they both knew, that changed everything. The first few weeks at Hogwarts passed in a blur of new experiences. Classes, castle explorations, and adjusting to life in the wizarding world kept both Harry and Hermione busy from dawn till dusk. They hadn't yet found an opportunity to speak with Dumbledore about their connection. Partly because their schedules were so full, but mostly because they were both secretly enjoying having something that was just theirs. In a school where Harry's fame made privacy nearly impossible, their bond was a sanctuary. It had grown stronger since their meeting. Now they could occasionally share deliberate thoughts if they concentrated hard enough, though it was more like impressions than actual words. More useful was the ability to sense each other's location in the castle, a kind of internal compass that always pointed them toward each other. They hadn't told anyone about their connection, not even Ron, who had become Harry's fast friend despite his initial wariness of Hermione. The three of them had settled into an uneasy group dynamic, with Ron and Hermione often at odds while Harry tried to keep peace between them. On Halloween evening, Harry sat at the feast without Hermione, concern gnawing at him. Through their bond, he'd felt her distress earlier that day after Charms class, when Ron had criticized her and called her a nightmare. The hurt had been so acute that Harry had wanted to confront Ron immediately, but Hermione had fled before he could follow. Since then, he'd felt her crying in what seemed to be a bathroom, but whenever he tried to send comforting thoughts, she withdrew further. It was the first time since meeting that she deliberately pulled away from their connection, and it left Harry feeling strangely hollow. "Where's Hermione?" he asked Neville as they filled their plates with Halloween treats. Parvati Patil said she's been in the girls' bathroom all afternoon, crying, Neville replied, looking uncomfortable. Ron shifted guiltily beside Harry but said nothing. Harry was about to make an excuse to go find her when Professor Quirrell burst into the hall, his turban askew and terror on his face. "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." He sank to the floor in a dead faint. As pandemonium broke out, Harry felt a spike of fear that wasn't his own. Hermione had sensed his alarm through their bond. What's happening? Her thought came to him faintly, as if from a distance. Troll in the castle, he projected back as forcefully as he could. Stay where you are. Don't leave the bathroom. But even as he thought it, horror washed over him. Hermione didn't know about the troll. She was alone, unprotected. As Percy led the Gryffindors upstairs, Harry pulled Ron aside. Hermione doesn't know about the troll, he said urgently. Ron's eyes widened. How do you? No time to explain. We have to find her. Slipping away from the other Gryffindors, they hurried toward the girls' bathroom. As they rounded a corner, Harry came to an abrupt halt, grabbing Ron's arm. It's not in the dungeons anymore, he whispered, pointing ahead where a massive, lumbering figure was shuffling into a doorway. It's going into the girls' bathroom. A high-pitched scream confirmed his worst fear. Hermione, they shouted together, breaking into a run. Inside, they found a terrifying scene. The troll, 12 feet tall with granite-gray skin, was advancing on Hermione, who was shrinking against the wall opposite, looking as if she was about to faint. The sink she had been standing by was now in pieces on the floor. Confuse it. Harry said desperately to Ron, seizing a tap and throwing it against the wall. The troll stopped a few feet from Hermione, turning its ugly head to see what had made the noise. It lumbered toward Harry instead, giving Ron an opening to circle around it. Oi, pea-brain! Ron yelled, throwing a metal pipe at the creature. As the boys distracted the troll, Harry felt a surge of determination through his bond with Hermione. She was gathering her courage, trying to remember spells that might help. Wingardium Leviosa. Ron shouted suddenly, performing the very charm they'd learned that day. The troll's club flew out of its hand, rose high into the air, and dropped with a sickening crack onto its owner's head. The troll swayed on the spot and then fell flat on its face with a thud that made the whole room tremble. Hermione was the first to speak. Is it dead? I don't think so, said Harry, just knocked out. He reached for her hand, helping her to her feet, and the moment their skin touched, their bond flared with relief and gratitude flowing both ways. You came for me, her thought reached him, tinged with wonder. Always, he replied without hesitation. A sudden slamming and loud footsteps made the three of them look up. Professor McGonagall burst into the room, closely followed by Snape and Quirrell. Quirrell took one look at the troll, let out a faint whimper, and sat quickly down on a toilet, clutching his heart. Snape bent over the troll while McGonagall was looking at Ron and Harry with an expression of cold fury that made them both step closer to Hermione protectively. What on earth were you thinking? Said Professor McGonagall, with cold fury in her voice. You're lucky you weren't killed. Why aren't you in your dormitory? Snape gave Harry a swift, piercing look that made him uncomfortable, but he held the professor's gaze without flinching. Then a small voice came out of the shadows. Please, Professor McGonagall, they were looking for me. Miss Granger. To everyone's surprise, Hermione took responsibility, claiming she'd gone looking for the troll herself because she'd read about them and thought she could handle it. If they hadn't found me, I'd be dead now, she finished. They didn't have time to fetch anyone. It was about to finish me off when they arrived. Harry and Ron tried to look as though this story wasn't new to them. Well, in that case, said Professor McGonagall, Miss Granger, you foolish girl, how could you think of tackling a mountain troll on your own? Hermione hung her head, and Harry felt her genuine shame through their connection. She hated lying to a teacher, but her desire to protect them was stronger. Miss Granger, 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for this, said Professor McGonagall. I'm very disappointed in you. If you're not hurt at all, you'd better get off to Gryffindor Tower. Hermione left, but not before shooting Harry a grateful look that carried through their bond like a warm current. Well, I still say you were lucky, but not many first years could have taken on a full-grown mountain troll and lived to tell the tale. McGonagall turned to Harry and Ron. 5 points will be awarded to each of you. Professor Dumbledore will be informed of this. You may go. As they walked back to Gryffindor Tower, Harry reached out through the bond, feeling for Hermione. She was waiting for them, her emotions a complex mix of gratitude, relief, and a newfound affection for Ron that surprised Harry. We should have gotten more than 10 points, Ron grumbled. 5, you mean, once she's taken off Hermione's. Good of her to get us out of trouble like that, Ron admitted. Mind you, we did save her. She might not have needed saving if you hadn't insulted her, Harry pointed out. Ron had the grace to look ashamed. Yeah, well, we're even now, aren't we? They had reached the portrait of the fat lady. Pig snout, they said and entered. The common room was packed and noisy. Everyone was eating the food that had been sent up. Hermione stood alone by the door, waiting for them. There was an embarrassed pause. Then, none of them looking at each other, they all said, thanks, and hurried off to get plates. But from that moment on, something shifted. As Harry, Ron, and Hermione filled their plates, Harry felt a new sense of completeness. Through their silent connection, he knew Hermione felt it too. They had found not just each other but also a friend in Ron. Some things you can't share without ending up liking each other, and knocking out a 12-foot mountain troll is one of them. Chapter 2, Discoveries and Dangers. The first snowfall of the season transformed Hogwarts into a winter wonderland. Frost etched delicate patterns across the castle windows, and the Great Lake froze solid enough for the braver students to skate across its surface. Inside the warm castle walls, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger huddled in a secluded corner of the library, surrounded by towering stacks of ancient books. Anything? Harry whispered, glancing up from a dusty tome entitled Magical Connections Through the Ages. Hermione sighed, pushing her bushy hair behind her ears. Nothing specific about spontaneous bonds. There's plenty about deliberately created ones, blood pacts, magical oaths, marriage bonds, but nothing that describes what happened to us. Since Halloween, they'd spent every spare moment researching their connection, sneaking time away from Ron with various excuses about homework. Their bond had strengthened after the troll incident, as if their shared moment of danger had removed some invisible barrier. Now they could communicate in more coherent thoughts rather than just emotions and impressions, though it still required concentration. Maybe we're looking in the wrong section, Harry suggested, closing his book and adding it to their already checked pile. What about the restricted section? Hermione chewed her lip thoughtfully. We'd need a professor's permission for that. And explaining why we want books on magical bonds might raise exactly the questions we're trying to avoid. Harry nodded, understanding her concern. In the weeks since they discovered their connection, they'd become increasingly protective of its secrecy. The way other students reacted to Harry's fame had only reinforced their caution. If being the boy who lived caused such a stir, what would people make of their unprecedented bond? A flicker of movement caught Harry's eye. Between the shelves, he glimpsed the distinctive silhouette of Professor Snape, his hooked nose buried in a book as he glided between the stacks. Snape, Harry projected to Hermione, their newest trick, sharing quick observations without speaking. She subtly angled herself to look, then began casually stacking their books. Let's go. I don't trust him. Neither could forget how the potions master had looked at Harry after the troll incident, that piercing stare as if trying to extract secrets directly from his mind. Snape's antagonism toward Harry had only intensified since Harry had joined the Gryffindor Quidditch team, becoming the youngest Seeker in a century. They gathered their things quietly, Harry wincing as his chair squeaked against the floor. Snape's head snapped up, his dark eyes narrowing as he spotted them. "Mr. Potter," he drawled, approaching with measured steps. "Miss Granger. What an industrious pair you make." Harry felt Hermione's anxiety spike through their bond, but her face remained composed. "Just doing some extra reading, Professor." Snape's gaze swept over their pile of books, and Harry hastily shifted his arm to cover a particularly telling title, Soul Magic, Connections Beyond the Physical. "Indeed," Snape said silkily. "And what subject requires such specialized research?" "History of magic," Hermione answered smoothly. "We're preparing an essay on magical cooperation through the ages." "How ambitious." Snape's disbelief was palpable. "Perhaps you would share which specific assignment Professor Binns has set that requires consultation of." His hand shot out, pulling a book from their stack before Harry could stop him. "Eternal Bonds, When Magic Connects Two Souls." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Beside him, Hermione's mind raced, formulating and discarding explanations at dizzying speed. "We were just exploring different types of magical cooperation," she said finally. "Most of these books weren't very helpful." Snape's eyes narrowed further. 5 points from Gryffindor for wasting valuable library resources on frivolous curiosity. He replaced the book, his gaze lingering on Harry. "I suggest you focus on assigned coursework, Potter. Your recent potions essay suggests you need all the study time you can get." With a final suspicious glance, he swept away, black robes billowing behind him. "That was close," Harry thought, exhaling slowly. "Too close," Hermione agreed. "We need to be more careful. Let me check these books out properly. We can look at them in the common room tonight." As they left the library, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that Snape's interest had been more than just his usual antagonism. Something about the professor's expression had suggested recognition, as if their research had confirmed a suspicion he already held. "Check," said Ron, his knight capturing Harry's bishop with a triumphant smash. The chess pieces, animated by magic, dragged the fallen bishop off the board. Harry frowned at the chessboard, trying to concentrate. He, Ron, and Hermione sat in the Gryffindor common room, the crackling fire casting warm light over them as evening settled in. Outside, snow fell in thick flurries, blanketing the grounds in pristine white. "Harry, you're hopeless at this," Ron laughed. "That's the third game in a row." "Sorry," Harry mumbled. "Bit distracted." The truth was, half his attention was focused on Hermione, who sat nearby in an armchair, hidden behind an enormous book entitled Magical Connections and Their Manifestations. Through their bond, he could sense her excitement as she discovered something potentially useful. "Listen to this," she projected. "Magical bonds between individuals can sometimes manifest in enhanced magical abilities, particularly when both parties cast spells simultaneously or channel magic toward a shared purpose." Harry perked up, nearly knocking over his remaining knight. "Have we ever tried casting spells together?" "Not deliberately. We should test it." Earth to Harry, Ron waved a hand in front of Harry's face. "Your move, mate." "Right, sorry." Harry hastily moved his queen, immediately realizing his mistake as Ron's castle captured it. "Checkmate," Ron declared triumphantly. "You're making this too easy." Harry shrugged, feigning disappointment while excitement bubbled beneath the surface. "Think I'm done for tonight?" Quidditch practice was brutal. "Fair enough." Ron began resetting the pieces. "Hermione, fancy a game?" She looked up, blinking as if surprised to be addressed. "Oh, no, thank you. I need to finish this chapter." Ron rolled his eyes. "You two are the only people I know who do extra reading for fun. Mental, both of you." Harry and Hermione exchanged a quick glance, a silent agreement passing between them. "Actually," Harry said, standing, "I just remembered I left my charms essay in the classroom." "Hermione, didn't you say you needed to check something in the charms corridor too?" She caught on immediately. Yes. The reference book I need might still be there. We'd better go before curfew. Ron looked between them suspiciously. Want me to come along? No need, Hermione said quickly. We'll be right back. As they climbed through the portrait hole, Ron's puzzled expression followed them. Once outside, Harry felt a pang of guilt. I hate lying to him, he admitted. Hermione nodded. Me too. But how do we even begin to explain this? By the way, Ron, Harry and I have a magical connection that formed 2 years ago, and now we can feel each other's emotions and sometimes read each other's thoughts? Harry chuckled despite himself. When you put it that way. They found an empty classroom on the 3rd floor, carefully checking for Peeves or Mrs. Norris before closing the door behind them. So, Hermione said, businesslike as ever despite the flutter of excitement Harry could feel through their bond, we know our magic created this connection somehow. The book suggests we might be able to enhance our spells if we cast together. What should we try? Harry asked, drawing his wand. Hermione considered. Something simple first. Lumos, maybe? They stood facing each other, wands raised. On 3, Harry suggested. 1, 2, 3, Lumos, they said in unison. Instead of the gentle glow they expected, both wand tips erupted with blinding white light that filled the classroom like miniature suns. Harry squinted against the glare, stunned by the intensity. Nox! Hermione gasped, but the light only dimmed slightly. Together, Harry thought, reaching for her free hand instinctively. The moment their fingers intertwined, the bond between them surged like an electrical current. Nox, they commanded simultaneously. The light extinguished instantly, plunging them into darkness broken only by moonlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, they stood in silence, still holding hands, both processing what had just happened. That was... Hermione began. Brilliant, Harry finished, grinning in the darkness. And a bit terrifying. The amplification effect is much stronger than the book suggested, Hermione mused, her analytical mind already working through implications. I wonder if it's because our bond formed spontaneously rather than through deliberate spell work. Harry nodded, then realized she probably couldn't see him clearly. We should try something else. Something practical. The levitation charm, Hermione decided. But let's be careful, aim at something small. They found a quill left behind on a desk. Standing side by side, they raised their wands. Wingardium Leviosa, they incanted together. The quill shot toward the ceiling as if fired from a cannon, embedding itself in the stone with such force that the tip snapped off and fluttered back down. Oops, Harry projected, fighting a laugh. Hermione's shock quickly gave way to scientific curiosity. The power amplification is exponential, not linear. We'll need to learn to modulate our output. Agreed, Harry said, examining the quill still stuck in the ceiling. But think about the possibilities, Hermione. If we can control this. She squeezed his hand, her excitement mingling with his through their connection. It could be incredibly useful. Especially if, the classroom door creaked open, and they jumped apart guiltily. Professor McGonagall stood in the doorway, her stern gaze taking in the scene, 2 first years out after hours, a quill impaled in her classroom ceiling. Mr. Potter. Miss Granger. Her voice was dangerously calm. Would either of you care to explain what you are doing in my classroom at this hour? And perhaps how school property came to be lodged in my ceiling? Harry felt Hermione's panic through their bond. Neither had realized they'd wandered into McGonagall's Transfiguration classroom in their haste to find an empty space. We were practicing, Professor, Hermione said, her voice higher than usual. For charms. McGonagall's eyebrow arched skeptically. At 9 o'clock in the evening? In a classroom not your own? We didn't want to disturb anyone in the common room, Harry added quickly. Their head of house studied them for a long moment. Your dedication to your studies is commendable. However, practicing unsupervised magic after hours is expressly forbidden, as I'm sure you're both aware. Yes, Professor, they mumbled in unison. McGonagall waved her wand, and the quill dislodged itself from the ceiling, floating down to her outstretched hand. She examined the damaged item with pursed lips. Most curious, she murmured. The levitation charm should not produce enough force to embed objects in solid stone. Her sharp eyes fixed on them again. 5 points each from Gryffindor for being out after hours. And I expect you both in my office tomorrow afternoon to discuss appropriate practice methods. Yes, Professor, they chorused again. As McGonagall escorted them back to Gryffindor Tower, Harry and Hermione maintained a careful distance between them, but their minds remained connected. She suspects something, Hermione thought worriedly. Should we tell her the truth? Harry wondered. Not yet. We still don't understand it ourselves. Harry agreed, but as they climbed through the portrait hole under McGonagall's watchful eye, he couldn't help feeling that their secret wouldn't remain secret much longer. As the Christmas holidays approached, Hogwarts transformed with festive decorations. 12 towering Christmas trees stood in the Great Hall, adorned with golden baubles and real, softly hooting owls. Magical snow fell from the enchanted ceiling but evaporated before reaching the tables below. Professor Flitwick had decorated his classroom with shimmering fairy lights that turned out to be actual fairies, their tiny voices creating a musical tinkling when disturbed. The holiday spirit lifted everyone's mood, everyone except Draco Malfoy, whose sneers seemed even more pronounced as he watched Harry, Ron, and Hermione cross the snow-covered courtyard. "Staying for Christmas, Potter," he called out. "No proper family to go home to?" Harry tensed but kept walking. Through their bond, Hermione sent calming thoughts, though her own anger simmered just beneath. "Ignore him," Ron muttered. "Not worth it." But Malfoy wasn't finished. He sauntered closer, flanked as always by Crabbe and Goyle. "I heard McGonagall's keeping an eye on you too," he said, nodding toward Harry and Hermione. "Special lessons, is it? Or has she finally realized something's not right with you?" Harry stopped short. "What's that supposed to mean, Malfoy?" Draco's pale face split into a malicious smile. "Just that some people have noticed how oddly you behave. Finishing each other's sentences. Always knowing where the other is." His eyes narrowed. "My father says some magical connections are unnatural. Dangerous." Hermione stepped forward, chin raised defiantly. "The only thing dangerous here is your imagination, Malfoy." "We'll see," Draco replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Father's on the school board, you know. He takes a special interest in anomalies." As Malfoy and his cronies swaggered away, Ron looked bewildered. "What was that about?" "No idea," Harry lied, though cold dread settled in his stomach. Through their bond, he could feel Hermione's matching concern. They hadn't yet told Ron about their connection, despite several close calls. Just last week, he'd caught them having what appeared to be a one-sided conversation, Harry responding to Hermione's thoughts without her having spoken aloud. They'd covered by claiming Harry had misheard something, but Ron's suspicious glances had increased. "We should talk," Harry projected to Hermione that evening as they sat in the common room. Ron had gone to bed early, exhausted from an impromptu snowball fight with his brothers. Hermione nodded subtly. "Malfoy knows something. Or at least, suspects something. But how?" Harry wondered. "We've been careful. Maybe not careful enough." Hermione sighed, closing her Ancient Runes textbook. "People are observant, Harry. And we do sometimes react to each other in ways that might seem unusual to others." It was true. They developed habits they barely noticed anymore, turning simultaneously when one sensed danger, responding to unspoken thoughts, instinctively moving closer when either felt threatened. Small things individually, but collectively, they created a pattern someone like Malfoy might notice. What did he mean about his father? Harry asked. Why would Lucius Malfoy care about us? Hermione's expression darkened. I've been doing more reading. About bonds and connections. She lowered her voice, though the common room was nearly empty. Some old wizarding families, purebloods especially, believe certain magical connections are corrupting. Particularly spontaneous ones, or those between people of different blood status. Harry's stomach clenched. Like between a half-blood and a Muggle-born? She nodded grimly. Some of the books I found contained warnings about unnatural bonds and how they should be contained or severed for the greater magical good. It's bigotry wrapped in pseudo-magical theory, of course, but people believe it, Harry finished. And Malfoy's father has influence. They sat in troubled silence, the fire crackling before them. Through their bond, a shared resolve began to form, to protect what they'd found, this connection that had brought both of them from loneliness to belonging. We should speak with Dumbledore after Christmas, Hermione decided. McGonagall was right, we need guidance from someone who might understand this. Harry agreed, though trepidation colored his thoughts. Revealing their bond meant giving up the one thing that had been just theirs in a world where Harry's every move seemed subject to public scrutiny. At least we'll have a quiet Christmas to figure things out, he said. With most students gone home. Hermione's eyes widened suddenly. Oh. I nearly forgot to tell you. I've decided to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas too. What? But your parents, I wrote to them last week, she explained. I told them I wanted to use the library for extra research. She blushed slightly. It's not entirely untrue. And they understood. They're disappointed, of course, but they're planning a skiing trip to France this summer to make up for it. Warmth flooded through Harry that had nothing to do with the fire. You're staying for me? Hermione's blush deepened. For us. To figure this out. Besides, she added with a small smile, I couldn't let you spend Christmas alone, could I? Not after feeling how much you've always hated holidays with the Dursleys. Harry didn't know what to say, so he simply projected his gratitude through their bond, a wave of emotion that made Hermione's eyes shine briefly. You're welcome, she whispered, the words unnecessary but comforting nonetheless. Christmas morning dawned cold and white. Harry woke to Ron's excited voice, Harry, wake up. Presents. Harry sat up, reaching automatically for his glasses. Ron was already tearing into his own pile of gifts at the foot of his bed. To Harry's astonishment, he had presents too, the first real Christmas presents he could remember receiving. As he opened them, a wooden flute from Hagrid, chocolate frogs from Hermione, Mrs. Weasley's hand-knitted sweater, a quiet joy filled him, spilling through his bond with Hermione. He felt her response immediately, she was awake too, opening her own gifts in the girls' dormitory. Happy Christmas, she projected. Happy Christmas, he returned. Thank you for the chocolate frogs. Thank you for the book on rare magical phenomena, she replied, her delight warm and bright in his mind. It's perfect. One gift remained, a light, oddly wrapped package with no card. As Harry opened it, something fluid and silvery gray slithered to the floor, pooling in gleaming folds. What's that? Asked Ron, momentarily distracted from his own presence. Harry lifted the shimmering material. Some kind of cloak? Well, try it on then. Harry threw the cloak around his shoulders, and Ron gasped. Harry, your body's gone. Looking down, Harry saw only the dormitory floor where his body should have been. An invisibility cloak, he breathed, amazed. A note had fallen from the folds of the cloak. In narrow, looping handwriting it read, Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you. There was no signature. Hermione. Harry projected excitedly. You won't believe what I just got. He sent mental images of the cloak and its effects, feeling her astonishment in return. An actual invisibility cloak? Harry, those are incredibly rare. Her thoughts raced ahead. Think of the possibilities. We could access the restricted section without permission. We could research our bond properly. Exactly what I was thinking, Harry replied, grinning. Tonight? Tonight, she confirmed. The Hogwarts library after dark was eerie. Shadows stretched between towering bookshelves, and the usually bustling space felt cavernous in its emptiness. Under the invisibility cloak, Harry and Hermione moved silently toward the restricted section, a small lantern held carefully between them. We need to be quick, Hermione whispered. Filch could come by at any time. The restricted section was separated from the rest of the library by a simple rope. As they stepped over it, the atmosphere seemed to change subtly, the air felt heavier, charged with something both ancient and unsettling. Where do we start? Harry murmured. Bond magic. Soul connections. Anything on spontaneous magical links. Hermione directed their search with practiced efficiency. They scanned the shelves, squinting to read titles in the dim lantern light. Many books had no titles at all, while others bore names that made Harry distinctly uncomfortable: Magic Most Evil, Secrets of the Darkest Arts, Bonds of Blood and Soul. Here, Hermione whispered, carefully extracting a slim volume bound in midnight blue leather. The Nature of Magical Bonds, From Created to Spontaneous. As she opened it, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the pages, a human wail of agony that echoed through the silent library. Harry nearly dropped the lantern in shock. Close it, he hissed. Hermione slammed the book shut, but the damage was done. The scream had announced their presence more effectively than any alarm. Run! Harry grabbed her hand, and they bolted from the restricted section, the invisibility cloak flapping around them. They heard Filch before they saw him, his shuffling footsteps and wheezed breathing as he hurried toward the source of the scream. Who's there? I know you're in here. Harry pulled Hermione into a side corridor, their hearts pounding in synchronized fear. They ran blindly, taking turns at random, focused only on putting distance between themselves and Filch. Finally, they ducked through a door Harry had never noticed before, finding themselves in an unused classroom. Desks and chairs were piled against the walls, and dust covered the floor, except for a path that led to an object standing at the far end of the room. It was a magnificent mirror, tall as the ceiling with an ornate gold frame, standing on two clawed feet. An inscription was carved around the top: Erist stra eru oit uber kafru oit onwosi. What is this place? Hermione whispered, catching her breath. No idea. Harry approached the mirror curiously, Hermione following close behind. As they stood before it, the glass rippled like disturbed water. When it cleared, Harry gasped. He was no longer seeing just his reflection and Hermione's. They were older in the mirror, perhaps 17 or 18. Mirror Harry stood tall and confident, his arm around Mirror Hermione's waist. Around them were other figures: Harry's parents, smiling proudly; Hermione's parents, looking amazed but pleased; Ron and other friends forming a protective circle. But what drew Harry's attention most was the golden thread of light visibly connecting his reflection to Hermione's, a physical manifestation of their bond, shimmering with power. In the mirror, they were casting spells together, their combined magic creating spectacular effects that protected their circle of loved ones from shadowy threats lurking at the edges. Do you see them? Harry whispered, his voice thick with emotion. My parents? Hermione stepped closer, her shoulder touching his beneath the cloak. I see us, she said softly. Older. Our bond visible for all to see. We're doing amazing magic together, Harry. Creating shields, healing people. Harry turned to her in surprise. You see that too? Their eyes met, and understanding dawned. Unlike ordinary reflections, This mirror was showing them the same vision, their shared future, perhaps. A future where their bond was acknowledged, accepted, even celebrated. "We're stronger together," Harry thought, the realization crystallizing in his mind. "Yes," Hermione agreed, her mental voice filled with wonder. "And others know it too." "Harry?" A new voice broke their connection. They whirled around to see Albus Dumbledore standing in the doorway, his long silver beard gleaming in the moonlight from the windows. Harry hastily pulled off the invisibility cloak, knowing they were caught. "Professor. I see you, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erist," Dumbledore said mildly, approaching them with soft footsteps. "We didn't mean to," Hermione began, but Dumbledore raised a gentle hand. "Curiosity is not a sin, Miss Granger. But this mirror is a most unusual artifact." His piercing blue eyes studied them over his half-moon spectacles. "Do you know what it shows us?" Harry glanced back at the mirror. His parents still smiled at him, and the golden thread connecting him to Hermione pulsed with vibrant energy. "Is it the future?" he asked hesitantly. "No, Harry," Dumbledore replied softly. "It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts." Hermione's brow furrowed. "But Professor, we're seeing the same thing. How is that possible if it's showing individual desires?" A curious expression crossed Dumbledore's face, surprise, followed by something like confirmation. "Indeed, Miss Granger. Most curious." He studied them both carefully. Perhaps when two hearts' desires are so closely aligned, the mirror reflects that harmony. Harry and Hermione exchanged glances, feeling Dumbledore was skirting the truth. "Sir," Harry said, gathering his courage, "there's something we've been meaning to talk to you about." "And I to you, Harry," Dumbledore replied, his eyes twinkling mysteriously. "But perhaps not tonight. It is very late, and even during holidays, students should not wander corridors after curfew." "But Professor," Hermione began. "The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow," Dumbledore continued as if he hadn't heard, "and I ask you not to go looking for it again. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live." He glanced at the invisibility cloak in Harry's hands. "Now, why don't you put that admirable cloak back on and get off to bed?" As they turned to leave, Dumbledore added, "And Harry, Miss Granger, I would welcome you both in my office after the holidays return. I believe we have much to discuss." They nodded, slipping back under the cloak. As they made their way through the silent corridors, both felt oddly reassured. Dumbledore knew, or at least suspected, about their bond, and he didn't seem alarmed. Instead of the fear or suspicion they'd seen from Snape and Malfoy, the headmaster had shown only curiosity and something like approval. "We'll tell him everything after Christmas," Harry decided, feeling Hermione's agreement. For now, the image from the Mirror of Erist stayed with them, a glimpse of what might be possible if they embraced their connection instead of hiding it. The remainder of the Christmas holidays passed in a blur of snowball fights with the Weasleys, chess games by the fire, and quiet moments where Harry and Hermione continued their research into magical bonds. Without access to the restricted section, they had limited resources, but Hermione had become adept at finding relevant information in seemingly unrelated books. "Listen to this," she said one evening, as they sat alone in the common room. "Magical resonance between compatible wizards can amplify spellwork exponentially, a phenomenon historically observed in twins and, rarely, in unusually close magical partnerships." She looked up from her copy of Advanced Magical Theory. "That explains our Lumos experience." Harry nodded thoughtfully. "So our magic is compatible?" "More than compatible," Hermione clarified. "Resonant. Like perfectly tuned instruments playing together." The portrait hole swung open, and Ron entered, his cheeks flushed from the cold outdoors. "You two still at it? Come on, Fred and George are starting an indoor snowball fight in the second-floor corridor. Enchanted snowballs that chase specific targets." Harry grinned, closing his book. Sounds brilliant. I think I'll pass, Hermione said primly, though Harry felt her amusement through their bond. As Harry stood to follow Ron, a sudden wave of dizziness struck him. The common room tilted, his vision blurred, and he stumbled against a chair. Harry? Ron's voice sounded distant. You all right, mate? But Harry couldn't answer. His consciousness had partially detached, splitting between his body in the common room and somewhere else, a dark corridor he didn't recognize, moving steadily toward a forbidden door. Harry! Hermione's mental voice cut through the disorientation. What's happening? He felt her hand on his arm, anchoring him back to reality. The vision receded, leaving him gasping. I'm fine, he managed, straightening up. Just stood too quickly. Ron looked skeptical. You went white as a ghost. Really, I'm okay. Harry forced a smile. Go ahead, I'll catch up in a minute. Once Ron had left, Harry sank back into his chair, meeting Hermione's worried gaze. It was like I was somewhere else, he explained in a low voice. A corridor in the castle, I think. The one with the forbidden door on the 3rd floor. Hermione's eyes widened. But you weren't actually there. No, but, it felt like I was following someone. Someone who wanted whatever's behind that door. They had discovered weeks ago that the 3rd floor corridor contained a trapdoor guarded by a massive 3-headed dog. After overhearing a conversation between Hagrid and a stranger about a Nicholas Flamel, they'd been researching the name, convinced it connected to whatever the dog was guarding. Could it be some new aspect of our bond? Hermione wondered. Maybe you're sensing someone with intentions toward whatever's being hidden. Harry rubbed his scar, which had begun to prickle uncomfortably. Maybe. But it felt darker. Like I wasn't just observing them, I was them. Hermione's concern flooded through their connection. We definitely need to talk to Dumbledore. This goes beyond our bond. If someone's trying to steal whatever's being guarded, we need to find out who Nicholas Flamel is first, Harry insisted. Otherwise, we won't have any concrete information for Dumbledore. Hermione bit her lip but nodded. All right. But Harry, if this happens again, I'll tell you immediately, he promised. Through our bond, if necessary. The moment solidified something they'd both been feeling since Christmas. Their connection wasn't just a curiosity or a research project anymore. It had become a tool, a weapon even, against whatever darkness lurked in Hogwarts' shadows. When term resumed in January, the castle filled once more with students returning from their holidays. Classes began again, and Harry found himself busier than ever between schoolwork and Quidditch practice. Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor team captain, had intensified their training schedule ahead of their upcoming match against Hufflepuff. One particularly cold afternoon, Harry trudged back from practice, his muscles aching and his breath fogging in the frosty air. As he crossed the entrance hall, a voice called his name. Potter. He turned to see Professor McGonagall approaching, her expression characteristically stern. Yes, Professor? The headmaster would like to see you in his office. Miss Granger is already waiting outside. McGonagall's gaze seemed to assess him. The password is Sugar Quills. Harry's heart jumped. The meeting they'd been anticipating for weeks was finally happening. Hermione? He projected. I'm outside Dumbledore's office, she confirmed, her nervousness palpable even across their connection. McGonagall just came and got me from the library. On my way, Harry replied, quickening his pace toward the headmaster's tower. He found Hermione pacing before a large stone gargoyle, her hands twisting anxiously. Did McGonagall say what this is about? He asked, though they both knew. Hermione shook her head. Just that Professor Dumbledore wanted to see us both. Harry took a deep breath. Ready? She nodded, and he stepped forward. Sugar Quills, he announced clearly. The gargoyle sprang to life, stepping aside as the wall behind it split open. A spiral staircase moved continuously upward, like an escalator. They stepped onto it together and rode in silence to a gleaming oak door with a brass knocker. Before Harry could reach for it, Dumbledore's voice called from within, "Enter." The office was a beautiful circular room, filled with curious silver instruments that whirred and emitted puffs of smoke. Portraits of previous headmasters and headmistresses dozed in their frames, while a magnificent red and gold bird, a phoenix, Harry realized, watched them from a golden perch. Dumbledore himself sat behind a massive desk, his silver beard gleaming in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. He smiled as they entered, gesturing to two comfortable chairs positioned before his desk. "Harry, Miss Granger. Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." They did so, exchanging nervous glances. Through their bond, Harry felt Hermione's resolve strengthen alongside his own. "I imagine you know why I've asked to speak with you," Dumbledore began, his blue eyes twinkling behind his half-moon spectacles. "Our connection," Harry said directly, deciding honesty was best. "Indeed." Dumbledore nodded approvingly. "Professor McGonagall informed me some months ago of Miss Granger's inquiry about magical connections. And I have observed certain synchronicities between you both that suggested something unusual was at work." Hermione sat straighter. "When did you first notice, Professor?" "The sorting ceremony provided my first hint," Dumbledore replied. "The sorting hat, while discreet about students' private thoughts, does share unusual magical phenomena with the headmaster. It mentioned a pre-existing bond of most uncommon nature." Harry and Hermione exchanged surprised glances. They'd never considered that the sorting hat would recognize their connection. "Recent events have only confirmed my suspicions," Dumbledore continued. "Professor McGonagall reported your extraordinary magical output when casting together. And your discovery of the Mirror of Eriste, and your shared vision within it, removed any doubt." "Sir," Hermione asked hesitantly, "do you know what this is? This connection between us?" Dumbledore steepled his fingers, considering them carefully. "I believe you have formed what magical scholars call an anima vinculo, a soul bond. Exceedingly rare and typically formed only through elaborate magical rituals or in moments of extreme magical necessity." His gaze turned curious. "May I ask when and how you first noticed this connection?" Harry and Hermione took turns explaining, Hermione's accidental magic on the playground at age 9, the strange sensations that followed, their gradual development of emotional awareness and eventually thought-sharing. Dumbledore listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never interrupting their narrative. When they finished, he remained silent for a long moment, apparently deep in thought. "Most extraordinary," he finally murmured. "A spontaneous soul bond between magically compatible individuals, formed before either had received formal training. I know of no precedent in recent magical history." "Is it dangerous?" Harry asked, voicing the fear they'd both carried since discovering their connection. "Not inherently, no," Dumbledore assured them. "But it is powerful. And power, as you may already have discovered, draws attention, not all of it welcome." Hermione nodded. "Malfoy and his father seem suspicious. And Professor Snape." "Ah, yes." Dumbledore's expression turned grave. "Professor Snape has expressed concerns about unusual magical interactions between you. And I fear young Mr. Malfoy may have communicated his observations to his father, who does indeed take an interest in rare magical phenomena." "Why would Lucius Malfoy care about us?" Harry asked. Dumbledore seemed to choose his words carefully. "There are those in the wizarding world who fear what they do not understand. A spontaneous bond between a half-blood and a muggle-born would represent something challenging to certain traditional worldviews." The implication was clear, though delicately stated. "Should we be worried?" Hermione pressed. "Cautious, perhaps," Dumbledore replied. "But not fearful. Hogwarts remains one of the safest places in Wizarding Britain, and your bond itself appears to be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. He rose from his desk, moving to a nearby bookshelf. I believe this might prove useful in your ongoing research. He selected a small, ancient-looking volume bound in faded purple leather. From my personal collection. Magical Connections of the Soul, a comprehensive study. Rather more accurate than most texts in our library. Hermione accepted the book with reverent hands. Thank you, Professor. Now, Dumbledore continued, returning to his desk, I suggest we meet regularly to monitor the development of your connection. As it grows, and it will continue to grow, new abilities may manifest that require guidance. Harry shifted uncomfortably. Sir, do other professors need to know about this? An excellent question, Harry. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. For now, I believe discretion serves us best. Professor McGonagall knows some aspects already, and her counsel is invaluable. But beyond that, he was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Without waiting for a response, it swung open to reveal Professor Snape, his black robes billowing dramatically as always. Headmaster. Snape stopped abruptly, his dark eyes narrowing as he took in Harry and Hermione. I was not aware you had guests. Severus, Dumbledore greeted him calmly. Mr. Potter and Miss Granger were just leaving. Our discussion on their advanced independent study project has concluded for now. Harry caught the subtle cover story and stood quickly. Hermione followed suit, carefully tucking Dumbledore's book into her bag. Snape's gaze followed the movement, suspicion evident in his expression. Independent study? How ambitious for first years. Indeed, Dumbledore agreed pleasantly. Most impressive initiative. Now, Harry, Miss Granger, we shall continue our discussion next week. Same time? They nodded, edging past Snape toward the door. His cold eyes tracked them, lingering particularly on Harry. Potter, he said suddenly as they reached the threshold. Your mind seems unusually occupied lately. One might almost think you were sharing thoughts with someone. Harry froze, feeling Hermione tense beside him. Through their bond, alarm flared. I don't know what you mean, Professor, Harry replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Snape's thin lips curved in a humorless smile. Don't you? Curious how you and Miss Granger often react simultaneously to unspoken stimuli. Almost as if you share awareness. Severus, Dumbledore's voice carried a note of warning. Harry and Miss Granger have my permission to go. Snape inclined his head slightly, though his eyes never left Harry's. Of course, Headmaster. Run along, Potter. Your thoughts are needed elsewhere, I'm sure. As they hurried down the spiral staircase, neither spoke aloud, but their minds raced in tandem. He knows, Hermione thought frantically. Or at least strongly suspects. But how? Harry wondered. We've been careful around him. The answer came to both of them simultaneously, a memory of something they'd read about magical disciplines. Legilimency, the magical extraction of feelings and memories from another's mind. You don't think he's been reading our thoughts? Harry asked, horrified. It would explain how he seems to know things he shouldn't, Hermione reasoned. We need to research mental defenses. As they reached the corridor, they slowed their pace to avoid attracting attention. We'll start tonight, Harry murmured. Dumbledore's book might have something useful. Hermione nodded, her mind already organizing a research plan. The meeting wasn't what I expected, she admitted. Dumbledore seems almost pleased about our connection. While Snape and the Malfoys definitely aren't, Harry added grimly. I think sides are forming, Hermione. And we don't even fully understand what we are yet. She squeezed his hand briefly. We will. And whatever comes, we'll face it together. The certainty in her voice, mirrored through their bond, steadied him. Whatever dangers their connection might bring, Harry couldn't regret it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't truly alone, and that made any risk worthwhile. February arrived, bringing slightly warmer weather but persistently gloomy skies. Harry's Quidditch match against Hufflepuff loomed closer, and would increase their training to nearly daily sessions, despite the muddy conditions. The evening before the match, Harry and Hermione sat in a secluded corner of the library, Dumbledore's book open between them. They'd been studying it in short bursts over the past weeks, carefully hiding it from prying eyes, particularly Ron's, who had grown increasingly suspicious of their frequent private conversations. "I think I've found something," Hermione whispered, pointing to a passage halfway down the page. Soul bonds typically evolve through distinct phases. Initial formation allows emotional awareness, followed by thought sharing. As the bond matures, magical resonance develops, allowing amplified spellcasting when working in concert. In the most profound cases, advanced stages may include shared magical reserves, allowing one bonded individual to draw upon the other's power in times of need. Harry leaned closer, their shoulders touching. "Shared magical reserves? You mean I could use your magic, or you could use mine?" "Theoretically," Hermione nodded, excitement brightening her eyes. "Though the book says it's extremely rare and typically only manifests in bonds that have existed for years. Our bond is already unusual," Harry pointed out. "Forming spontaneously at age 9 isn't exactly normal." "True." Hermione turned the page. "Oh. Listen to this part. Distance effects on bonded pairs vary widely. Some report weakening of connection over physical distance, while others maintain full awareness regardless of separation. Most commonly, emotional transfer remains robust across distances, while thought sharing requires proximity." Harry considered this. "We've never been very far apart since meeting at Hogwarts. The furthest was probably when I was at Quidditch practice and you were in the castle. And we could still feel each other's emotions then, though clear thoughts were harder," Hermione recalled. "I wonder what would happen over greater distances." "Let's hope we don't have to find out," Harry said, though the question intrigued him too. They continued reading, finding fascinating details about historical bonded pairs, most of them magical twins or couples who had deliberately created bonds through complex rituals. None matched their experience of a spontaneous childhood connection. As curfew approached, they reluctantly packed up. Harry needed a good night's sleep before tomorrow's match, though his nerves about facing Hufflepuff's team had been compounded by a new worry: Snape would be refereeing. "Try not to think about Snape," Hermione advised as they walked back to Gryffindor Tower. "Focus on the game." "Easier said than done," Harry muttered. "Especially when he might be trying to read my thoughts." They'd found a section in Dumbledore's book about occlumency, the magical defense of the mind against external penetration, but the techniques required extensive practice they hadn't had time for yet. "Just avoid eye contact," Hermione suggested. "The book said legilimency usually requires it." "Great. Play Quidditch while never looking at the referee. Should be simple." Hermione smiled despite herself. "You'll be fine. Besides, Dumbledore will be watching the match. Snape wouldn't try anything with him there." Harry hoped she was right. As they climbed through the portrait hole, they found the common room buzzing with pre-match excitement. Ron waved them over to where he sat with Neville, playing Exploding Snap. "Where've you two been?" Ron asked. "Library again?" "Just some last-minute research," Hermione said vaguely. Neville looked up from the game, his round face troubled. "Harry, is it true Snape's refereeing tomorrow?" "Unfortunately," Harry confirmed, dropping into an armchair. "Don't play," Neville said at once. "Say you're ill. Pretend to break your leg," Ron suggested. "Really break your leg," Seamus Finnegan called from nearby. Harry shook his head. "I can't. There isn't a reserve seeker. If I back out, Gryffindor can't play at all." Through their bond, Hermione projected reassurance, though he could feel her own underlying worry. I'll be watching every second. If anything seems wrong, run onto the field. Harry teased, though he appreciated her concern. If necessary, she replied with such determination that he blinked in surprise. Later that night, as Harry lay in bed trying to quiet his mind for sleep, he felt Hermione's consciousness brush against his, a now familiar sensation like a gentle tap on his mental door. "Still awake?" she asked. "Can't sleep," he admitted. "I've been thinking about tomorrow. If Snape tries anything during the match, Dumbledore will be watching," Harry reminded her, repeating her earlier assurance. "Yes, but just in case, remember how we amplified Lumos? I've been practicing focusing my magic toward you. If you need extra strength tomorrow, try to draw on our connection. I'll be ready." The offer touched him deeply. "Thanks, Hermione. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." "Better prepared than surprised," she replied, her mental voice tinged with affection. "Good night, Harry." "Good night." As her presence receded, Harry felt comforted. Whatever challenges tomorrow's match brought, he wouldn't face them alone. The Quidditch stadium hummed with excitement as students filled the stands. Hermione sat with Ron and Neville, a pair of binoculars ready to keep track of Harry. Through their bond, she felt his nervous determination as he waited with the team in the changing rooms. "I've never seen Snape look so mean," Ron observed as the teachers' section filled. "Look, they've come to watch Snape finally take Gryffindor apart, those Slytherins." Hermione followed his gaze to where Malfoy sat with Crabbe and Goyle, looking particularly smug. She was more interested in the tall figure with the long silver beard taking a seat in the highest row. "Dumbledore's here," she said, relief flooding through her. She sent the observation to Harry immediately, feeling his tension ease slightly in response. The teams walked onto the field, Snape looking particularly sour as he surveyed the Gryffindor players. Through her binoculars, Hermione saw him give Harry a particularly nasty glare. "Just focus on the snitch," she projected. "Ignore him." Harry nodded almost imperceptibly as he mounted his broom. The match began, and immediately Hermione sensed something wrong. Harry's normally fluid movements seemed jerky and uncoordinated, his broom dipping and swaying erratically. Through their bond, she felt his confusion and frustration. "The broom's fighting me," his thought came, tinged with alarm. "Like someone's interfering with it." Hermione's gaze snapped to Snape, who was watching Harry intently, his lips moving silently. Remembering what she'd read about eye contact and spell casting, she felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "Ron," she whispered urgently, "Snape's jinxing Harry's broom." "What? How do you know?" She had no time to explain her suspicions, or how she could feel Harry's growing distress. "Trust me. I need to stop him." Without waiting for a response, Hermione slipped through the crowd, making her way toward the teacher's stand. As she moved, she maintained her connection with Harry, projecting calm and determination. "Hold on," she urged him. "I'm going to help." Harry's broom was bucking more violently now, drawing gasps from the crowd as he clung on desperately. Hermione reached the section just below where Snape sat, still muttering his incantation with unwavering focus on Harry. What happened next occurred so quickly that afterward, Hermione herself wasn't entirely sure how she'd done it. She crouched below the stands, pointed her wand upward, and whispered, "Incendio." But as she cast the spell, she did something she'd been practicing in private. She channeled her magic through their bond, drawing on their combined power while narrowly focusing the output. The result was a perfectly controlled flame that caught the hem of Snape's robes without spreading to anyone else nearby. The distraction worked. As Snape jumped up to stomp out the flames, his eye contact with Harry broke. Immediately, Harry regained control of his broom, steadying himself with obvious relief. "It worked," Hermione projected triumphantly. "Was that Snape?" Harry asked, already diving back into the game. "I think so. He was staring at you and muttering." Harry had no time to respond. He'd spotted the snitch and went into a spectacular dive that had the crowd on its feet. Seconds later, he pulled out of the dive with the tiny golden ball clutched in his hand. The stadium erupted in cheers as Harry held the snitch aloft. Gryffindor had won, and in record time. Through their bond, Hermione felt Harry's exhilaration and sent back her own jubilation as she hurried to meet him on the field. In the changing rooms afterward, Harry was surrounded by celebrating teammates, but his attention was split between their congratulations and the conversation happening in his mind. It doesn't make sense, Hermione was thinking. Why would Snape try to hurt you during a match with Dumbledore watching? Maybe he thought no one would notice with so much else happening, Harry suggested. But we need to tell Dumbledore. Agreed. After the celebration dies down. Later, as the Gryffindor team made their triumphant return to the common room, Harry managed to slip away with Hermione. They found an empty classroom where they could speak privately. It was definitely a jinx, Hermione insisted. I've read all about them. You need to maintain eye contact, and Snape wasn't blinking. And the moment you broke his concentration, I got control back, Harry added. But why? Snape's unpleasant, but trying to kill a student in front of the entire school? Unless. Hermione hesitated. What if it's connected to whatever's being guarded on the third floor? What if he thinks we know something? Harry considered this. Or maybe it's about our bond. You said some people fear unusual magical connections. Before they could discuss further, the classroom door swung open. Professor McGonagall stood there, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Potter, Miss Granger, she said crisply. The headmaster would like to see you immediately. As they followed her through the corridors, Hermione's mind raced with possibilities. Had someone seen her set Snape's robes on fire? Had Dumbledore somehow sensed the magical surge when she channeled power through their bond? In Dumbledore's office, they found not only the headmaster but also Snape, whose singed robes and thunderous expression confirmed Hermione's fears. Ah, Harry, Miss Granger, Dumbledore greeted them, his expression grave despite the usual twinkle in his eyes. I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding today's Quidditch match. Snape's dark eyes bored into Hermione. Perhaps Miss Granger would care to explain why she felt it necessary to set fire to a professor during a school sporting event? Hermione stood her ground. You were jinxing Harry's broom, Professor. I saw you maintaining eye contact and muttering an incantation. A serious accusation, Dumbledore observed mildly. Severus? Snape's expression could have curdled milk. I was performing a counter-jinx, Headmaster. Someone was indeed interfering with Potter's broom, but it was not I. Harry stepped forward. If you were trying to help, sir, then I apologize for the misunderstanding. But someone was definitely jinxing my broom. Indeed, Dumbledore agreed. I observed the incident myself and noted two distinct magical signatures influencing your broomstick, Harry. One malevolent, one protective. Hermione and Harry exchanged startled glances. If Snape was telling the truth, then who had been trying to hurt Harry? However, Dumbledore continued, that is not the only matter of concern today. His gaze turned to Hermione. Miss Granger, the particular method you used to create that fire was most unusual. Professor Flitwick informs me that the controlled incendio spell you cast is typically taught to fourth years, not first years. Hermione felt Harry's alarm mirror her own. Had Dumbledore somehow detected her channeling magic through their bond? I've been practicing, she said carefully. Advanced spell work. Indeed. Dumbledore's eyes seemed to see right through her. And perhaps, drawing upon additional resources to enhance your casting? The room fell silent. Even Snape seemed to be holding his breath, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. He knows, Harry projected. Should we tell the truth? I think we have to, Hermione replied. At least about using our bond for magic, if not about suspecting Snape. Aloud, she said, "Yes, Professor. I accessed our bond." To focus the spell more precisely. Snape's eyes widened fractionally. "You admit to manipulating this connection? To attack a teacher?" "To protect Harry," Hermione corrected firmly. "I believed he was in danger. As would any of us, perceiving a threat to someone we care for," Dumbledore interjected smoothly. "The method, however, represents a significant development in your bond's progression." He turned to McGonagall. "Minerva, would you agree this demonstrates advancement to the third phase described in the text I shared with you?" McGonagall nodded, looking both concerned and impressed. "Directed magical amplification through conscious channeling. Remarkably advanced for a bond so recently acknowledged." "Which only confirms my concerns, Headmaster," Snape said coldly. "Unchecked magical resonance between untrained minds presents considerable risks. Today it was a controlled fire. Tomorrow?" "Your concern is noted, Severus," Dumbledore replied. "And not without merit. Which is why our additional lessons with Harry and Miss Granger will now include proper channeling techniques." He turned back to them, his expression softening. "You acted out of loyalty and concern, qualities I greatly admire. But magic enhanced through your bond must be approached with extraordinary caution. Power amplified is also power less controlled." "We understand, Professor," Harry said. "We've been researching, but there's so much we don't know yet." "Then let us remedy that," Dumbledore said, rising from his desk. "Beginning tomorrow evening, you will both report to Professor McGonagall's classroom after dinner for supplementary training. I believe discretion remains advisable, so we shall maintain the cover of advanced independent study." As they left the office, Harry and Hermione felt oddly relieved despite the seriousness of the meeting. They had suspected Snape wrongly, at least according to Dumbledore, but had gained something valuable, official guidance for their developing abilities. But if Snape wasn't jinxing your broom, Hermione thought as they walked back toward Gryffindor Tower, then who was? "I don't know," Harry replied grimly. "But whoever it was, they're still out there. And they might try again." The thought sobered them both. Their bond had protected Harry today, but the incident had also revealed their connection to more people than they'd intended. As word spread, and in Hogwarts, secrets rarely remained secret for long, they would need to be prepared for whatever came next. Whether fascination, fear, or something more sinister, attention was turning toward them. And not all of it would be friendly. The weeks following the Quidditch incident brought significant changes for Harry and Hermione. 3 evenings a week, they met with Professor McGonagall for what were officially called advanced practical magic sessions but were actually carefully structured training in how to manage their bond. The key, McGonagall explained during their first lesson, is conscious modulation. Your connection naturally amplifies magical output when you work in tandem. Learning to control that amplification is essential. They practiced simple spells repeatedly, focusing on maintaining consistent power levels rather than maximum output. It was harder than either had expected. Their natural tendency was to feed off each other's magic, creating escalating cycles of power that quickly exceeded their control. Again, McGonagall would say after each explosive result, "Focus on restraint, not power." Slowly, they improved. By mid-March, they could reliably cast spells together without shattering the practice objects or setting things ablaze. McGonagall seemed cautiously pleased with their progress. "You're developing control more quickly than expected," she admitted after a particularly successful session. "Though given Miss Granger's methodical nature and Mr. Potter's natural magical affinity, perhaps I shouldn't be surprised." Their training remained secret from most of the school, but rumors inevitably spread. Their frequent disappearances with McGonagall were noticed, particularly by Ron, who grew increasingly frustrated with their vague explanations. "Advanced study again?" he asked skeptically one evening as they prepared to leave the common room. "That's the third time this week." What exactly are you studying that's so important? Harry and Hermione exchanged uncomfortable glances. They discussed telling Ron about their bond but had hesitated, partly due to Dumbledore's advice for discretion and partly from fear of how he might react. It's complicated, Ron, Hermione said finally. We're not supposed to talk about it. Ron's face darkened. Right. Another secret between you two. Seems like there's a lot of those lately. As he stalked away, Harry felt a pang of guilt. We should tell him, he said quietly. He's our friend. Hermione nodded slowly. After tonight's session. We'll ask McGonagall if it's all right. But that evening's lesson took an unexpected turn. When they arrived at McGonagall's classroom, they found not only their head of house but also Professor Snape waiting for them. Mr. Potter, Miss Granger, McGonagall greeted them. Professor Snape will be joining us tonight. Given recent events, the headmaster feels it prudent to introduce you to the basics of mental defense. Harry's heart sank. Occlumency, the very skill they'd been trying to research on their own. Your bond creates certain vulnerabilities, Snape said without preamble. A connection between minds, however beneficial in some respects, also presents a potential access point for those skilled in legilimency. Hermione raised her hand out of habit. Sir, does that mean someone could use legilimency on one of us to access both our minds? Snape's lips thinned. Precisely, Miss Granger. Your bond creates a bridge. Cross one side, potentially access both. The implication was chilling. Harry thought of his strange visions of the third-floor corridor, the sense of following someone else's path. Could those be more than just random experiences? Occlumency requires discipline and focus, Snape continued. Qualities Mr. Potter has demonstrated a remarkable lack of in my classroom, but which circumstances now demand he develop. The session that followed was grueling. Snape insisted on working with them individually, starting with Hermione. He would attempt to penetrate her mental defenses while she tried to resist using techniques he barely explained. When Harry's turn came, the experience was even worse. The moment Snape murmured legilimens, Harry felt the professor's presence invade his mind like cold fingers probing through his memories. Thoughts and images flashed before him, the Dursleys locking him in his cupboard, Hermione's face the first time they met on the train, the golden thread connecting them in the mirror of Eriste. Pathetic, Snape sneered as Harry fell to his knees, gasping. Your mind is an open book, Potter. Anyone with the slightest skill could walk through your memories at will. Through their bond, Harry felt Hermione's indignation on his behalf, but also her fear. If Snape could access Harry's mind so easily, what else might he have seen in their memories? What secrets had they inadvertently revealed? Again, Snape commanded, raising his wand. By the end of the session, both Harry and Hermione were exhausted, their heads pounding. They had made minimal progress in resisting Snape's mental intrusions, though Hermione had managed to block him briefly on her final attempt. You will practice the clearing techniques I've taught you every night before sleep, Snape instructed as they prepared to leave. Your bond makes this training not merely advisable but essential. As they walked back to Gryffindor Tower, too drained to even communicate mentally, Hermione finally broke the silence. Harry, what if those visions you've had, of the third-floor corridor, what if they're not just random? What if someone is somehow accessing your mind through our bond? The question had been haunting him too. But who? And why? I don't know, Hermione admitted. But after tonight, we need to be more careful. Both of us. Harry nodded grimly. The security they'd felt in their connection had been shaken. What had seemed like a gift, a special bond that made them stronger together, suddenly revealed its potential dangers. And somewhere in the castle, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting, perhaps even testing the limits of their unique connection. The Easter holidays brought no relief from their growing workload. Teachers piled on homework in preparation for end-of-year exams, and Harry and Hermione's additional training sessions continued with increasing intensity. McGonagall worked them harder than ever on controlled magical channeling, while Snape's occlumency lessons remained a weekly torment. Again, Potter, Snape would demand after each failed attempt to block his mental intrusions. Your defenses are non-existent. Though Harry struggled, Hermione made steady progress. By mid-April, she could successfully repel Snape's initial probes, if not his more determined attacks. Through their bond, she tried to share techniques with Harry, but the transfer of such skills proved difficult. It's like trying to explain how to swim without actually being in water, she complained after a particularly frustrating session. I can feel what works, but I can't make you feel it too. Their research continued alongside their training. One rainy afternoon in the library, while organizing study schedules for their approaching exams, Hermione gave a sudden gasp that drew Harry's attention immediately. Nicholas Flamel, she whispered, pushing a heavy book toward him. I've found him. Harry leaned forward eagerly. They had been searching for information on Flamel since Hagrid's slip months ago, convinced the name was connected to whatever was hidden on the third floor. The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with making the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione read in a hushed voice. The stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which makes the drinker immortal. Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone and celebrated his 665th birthday last year. Harry's eyes widened. The Philosopher's Stone. That's what the dog's guarding. That's what someone's trying to steal. As the pieces fell into place, they realized the significance of what they'd discovered. The stone's power to provide unlimited gold and immortality would tempt many wizards, but who at Hogwarts would risk stealing it from under Dumbledore's nose? We need to tell someone, Hermione insisted. Dumbledore should know someone's after the stone. He probably already does, Harry reasoned. Remember, he mentioned observing 2 magical signatures during the Quidditch match, one trying to jinx my broom, one trying to save me. He knows there's a threat inside Hogwarts. They debated whether to approach Dumbledore directly but ultimately decided to wait and gather more information first. With exams approaching and their training intensifying, they had little opportunity for further investigation anyway. Until one evening in early May, when everything changed. Harry and Hermione were returning from a particularly demanding session with McGonagall when they encountered Hagrid in the entrance hall, furtively carrying something wrapped in a bundle. Hagrid? Harry called. What's that you've got? The giant looked startled, quickly adjusting his grip on the mysterious package. Nothing. Just some supplies for me garden. Hermione's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Gardening supplies that need to be wrapped up like that? Look, I'm in a bit of a hurry, Hagrid said uncomfortably. Why don't ya come visit me tomorrow? Cup o' tea? They agreed, but as Hagrid hurried away, a distinct sense of unease passed between them through their bond. He's hiding something, Hermione thought. And it's not gardening supplies, Harry agreed. The next day, they made their way to Hagrid's hut near the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Ron accompanied them, still somewhat distant but unable to resist his curiosity about Hagrid's secretive behavior, which Harry had mentioned at breakfast. When they arrived, they found all the curtains closed and the hut swelteringly hot despite the mild spring weather outside. A fire blazed in the grate, and Hagrid seemed uncharacteristically nervous as he served them tea. So, ya wanted ter ask me somethin', he said, avoiding direct eye contact. Yes, said Harry, deciding directness was best. We were wondering if you could tell us what's guarding the Philosopher's Stone apart from Fluffy. Hagrid's teacup clattered against its saucer. How do ya know about Fluffy? He spluttered. We've known for months, Hermione said matter-of-factly. And we know the stone belongs to Nicholas Flamel. We're just concerned that someone might be trying to steal it. Hagrid looked flabbergasted. Listen ter me, all 3 of ya, you're meddlin' in things that don't concern ya. It's dangerous. You forget that dog, and you forget what it's guardin'. That's between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel, but if someone's trying to steal it, Harry persisted. Nonsense, Hagrid interrupted. Nobody's gonna steal it. Not with all the protections. Ain't just fluffy garden it. Got enchantments from the teachers too, Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall, Professor Quirrell, Professor Dumbledore himself, and Professor Snape. Harry and Hermione exchanged significant glances. This confirmed what they'd suspected, multiple protections surrounded the stone. Hang on, Ron said suddenly, fanning himself. Hagrid, can we open a window? It's boiling in here. Can't, Ron. Sorry, Hagrid replied, glancing nervously at the fire. Following his gaze, Harry noticed something large and black nestled in the heart of the flames. Hagrid, he asked slowly, what exactly is that in the fire? Hagrid's beard twitched with a sheepish smile. That's a dragon egg, Ron breathed, moving closer for a better look. But Hagrid, how did you get one? They're illegal. Won it, Hagrid said proudly. Last night in the village, havin' a few drinks, got into a game o' cards with a stranger. Seemed quite glad to get rid of it, to be honest. But what are you going to do when it hatches? Hermione asked, horrified. You live in a wooden house. As Hagrid enthusiastically described his dragon-rearing plans, Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the contrast between the hut's heat and the cool spring air outside. A stranger happened to have a dragon egg, something Hagrid had always wanted, and gambled it away to him. That seemed like an extraordinary coincidence. Hagrid, he interrupted, did this stranger ask about Hogwarts at all? Well, yeah. Asked what I did, so I told him I was gamekeeper here. He asked a bit about the sort of creatures I look after. I told him what I'd always really wanted was a dragon. Then we got onto some other magical creatures, like Fluffy. Did he seem interested in Fluffy? Harry asked, trying to sound casual. Well, course he was interested in Fluffy. How often do ya come across a three-headed dog, even if you're in the trade? But I told him, I said, the trick with any beast is to know how to calm it. Take Fluffy, for instance, just play him a bit music and he falls straight to sleep. Hagrid looked horrified at what he'd just revealed. I shouldn't ha' told ya that. Forget I said it. But it was too late. As they hurried back to the castle afterward, the implications were clear. Someone's trying to steal the stone, Harry said urgently. And they tricked Hagrid into revealing how to get past Fluffy. It has to be the same person who tried to jinx your broom, Hermione reasoned. But who? Ron, who had been brought up to speed on their Quidditch suspicions, frowned thoughtfully. You thought it was Snape initially, right? But Dumbledore said he was casting a counter-jinx. That's what Snape claimed, Harry pointed out. But what if Dumbledore is wrong about him? Or what if it's someone else entirely? Hermione suggested. Someone we haven't suspected? The question hung between them as they entered the castle, none of them with a satisfactory answer. That night, as Harry prepared for bed, he felt Hermione reaching for their connection, a now familiar gentle pressure against his consciousness. I've been thinking, she projected once he opened to her. About the Philosopher's Stone and your visions of the third-floor corridor. You think they're connected? Harry asked, settling onto his bed and closing his curtains for privacy. What if someone is deliberately trying to influence you through our bond? Using it somehow to gain access to your mind? The thought had occurred to Harry too, especially after Snape's warnings during their occlumency lessons. But how would anyone even know about our bond, let alone how to exploit it? Malfoy suspects something. And if he's told his father? You think Lucius Malfoy is trying to steal the stone? Harry asked skeptically. I don't know, Hermione admitted. But someone knows more about our connection than they should. And they might be using it against us. The possibility was disturbing. Their bond, which had been a source of strength and comfort, suddenly seemed like a potential vulnerability, a back door through which an enemy might enter. We need to master occlumency, Harry decided. Both of us. Even if Snape's teaching methods are horrible. Agreed, Hermione replied. And we should talk to Dumbledore. About everything, the stone, your visions, our concerns about someone exploiting our connection. Tomorrow, Harry promised. After our morning classes. But as they would soon discover, tomorrow would bring challenges they couldn't possibly have anticipated, and their bond would face its first true test against forces determined to tear them apart. Chapter 3, Trials of Fire. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Great Hall, falling in golden beams across the hundreds of desks arranged in neat rows. The enchanted ceiling above reflected a perfect blue sky, mockingly serene compared to the tension rippling through the students below. End-of-year exams had arrived at Hogwarts. Harry Potter stared at his transfiguration paper, his mind drifting despite his best efforts to focus. The hall was uncomfortably warm, and the scratching of quills around him created a hypnotic background drone. Through their bond, he could feel Hermione 3 rows ahead, her concentration laser-sharp, her mind working through problems with methodical precision. That's it, she projected suddenly, catching his wandering attention. Question 14 is about Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. Remember our study session in the library? Harry smiled, grateful for the reminder. Right. The 5 exceptions to elemental conjuration. He bent over his parchment with renewed focus, listing the exceptions they discussed last week. Their ability to share information through their bond had proven invaluable during exam preparations, though they'd been careful not to abuse it during the tests themselves. Both agreed that using their connection to directly share answers would be cheating, but gentle reminders about topics they'd already studied together seemed acceptable. When Professor McGonagall announced the end of the exam period, Harry set down his quill with relief. One down, several more to go. As students filed out of the Great Hall, he caught up with Hermione near the doorway. "How'd you do?" he asked aloud for the benefit of others nearby. "I think I mixed up the dates for the Goblin Rebellion of 1612 and History of Magic," she fretted, clutching her notes to her chest. "And I should have included more about the lunar influence on switching spells." Ron, joining them with a groan, rolled his eyes. "Only you would worry about getting 112% instead of 110. I'll be lucky if I passed at all." They made their way outside, seeking relief from the castle's stifling heat. The grounds were alive with students enjoying the break between exams, lounging under trees and dipping their feet in the lake where the giant squid basked in the shallows. "At least the practical exams are going well," Harry said as they settled in the shade of a large beech tree. Charms was pretty straightforward. What he couldn't say with Ron present, was how their training with McGonagall had improved his magical control dramatically. During his Charms practical, Professor Flitwick had commented on his remarkably precise wand work, when Harry had made a pineapple tap dance perfectly across the desk. "Speak for yourself," Ron groaned, flopping onto the grass. "I accidentally gave my mouse a trunk instead of changing it into a snuff box in Transfiguration. Lost points for unnecessary elephantine features," McGonagall said. As Ron launched into a detailed account of his Transfiguration mishaps, Harry felt a familiar pressure building behind his scar. It had been happening more frequently in recent weeks, sharp, sudden pain that seemed to coincide with strange flashes of foreign emotions. Anger. Impatience. Anticipation. Emotions that didn't belong to him or Hermione. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" Hermione's concerned thought touched his mind. "Just a headache," he deflected, though they both knew it was more than that. They'd planned to speak with Dumbledore about their concerns, the stone, Harry's headaches, the possibility that someone was trying to exploit their bond, but the headmaster had left for London 2 days ago, summoned urgently by the Ministry of Magic. Professor McGonagall had assured them he would return before the end of exams, but his absence left them uneasy. "You know what's mental?" Ron said suddenly, interrupting Harry's thoughts. "All this studying when it's so hot. We deserve a break. We should visit Hagrid, see how that dragon egg is coming along." Hermione sat up straighter. "That's not a bad idea, actually. We haven't checked on him in days." The truth was, they'd been avoiding Hagrid's hut since discovering the dragon egg. The gamekeeper's reckless acquisition had worried them, but with exams and their other concerns, they hadn't found time to follow up. As they approached the wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, they saw Hagrid sitting outside in a large armchair, shelling peas into a bowl. He looked up as they approached, his beetle-black eyes crinkling with a smile. "All done with your exams?" he called cheerfully. "Not yet," Hermione replied. "We still have defense against the dark arts tomorrow." "How's the egg?" Harry asked, looking around cautiously for any sign of a baby dragon. Hagrid's expression fell. "Gone," he said quietly. "Had to send him away, didn't I? Little Norbert got too big to hide." "Norbert?" Ron repeated incredulously. "The dragon," Hagrid explained. "Hatched last week. Beautiful he was, too. But Professor Dumbledore found out, don't know how, and arranged fair some o' his friends to take him to Romania. Dragon sanctuary there." Though Hagrid looked heartbroken, Harry felt relieved. The last thing they needed was an illegal dragon complicating matters further. "Probably for the best," Hermione said gently. "Dragons need space to fly and other dragons for company." Hagrid nodded glumly. "S'pose you're right. Still, I miss the little tyke." As they chatted, Harry's gaze drifted toward the forbidden forest that loomed dark and forbidding beyond Hagrid's hut. Something about the shadows between the trees made his skin prickle. His scar gave another painful throb. "Hagrid," he said suddenly, "that night you won Norbert's egg. What did the stranger you were playing cards with look like?" "Dunno," Hagrid replied, frowning. "Kept his hood up the whole time. Not that unusual at the Hog's Head, lot o' folks like their privacy there." "Did he ask you anything else?" Harry pressed. "Besides about Fluffy?" Hagrid's brow furrowed in concentration. "Well, he wanted to know what sort o' creatures I look after. So I told him after Fluffy, a dragon would be no problem, then he asked some odd questions about you, Harry." Harry felt a chill despite the warm day. "About me?" "Yeah. Wanted to know if you spent much time around the grounds. If you had any special abilities." Hagrid looked troubled. Come to think of it, was a bit strange. Hermione's alarm pulsed through their bond. "Someone's been asking specifically about you." And right after getting information about Fluffy, Harry added silently. Aloud, he asked, "Hagrid, what exactly did you tell him about me?" "Nothin' much," Hagrid said defensively. "Just that you're a good lad. Bright. Said you had some unusual magical connection with your friend here." He nodded toward Hermione, "but that weren't no secret. Half the schools noticed how you two always seem to know what the others thinkin'. Harry and Hermione exchanged alarmed looks. Their bond wasn't as secret as they'd hoped, and now a mysterious stranger, likely the same person after the Philosopher's Stone, knew about it too. "We need to go," Harry said urgently, standing up. "Thanks, Hagrid." As they hurried back toward the castle, Ron looked bewildered. "What's got into you two? And what's this about a magical connection?" They had reached the entrance hall when Harry stopped abruptly, turning to face Ron. The time for secrecy was over. "Ron, there's something we need to tell you," he said firmly. "Something important." Ron's reaction to learning about their soul bond cycled through disbelief, hurt, and finally cautious acceptance. "So you've been able to, read each other's minds since you were 9, he asked as they sat in an empty classroom, having decided the common room was too public for such a conversation. Not exactly reading minds, Hermione explained. More like, sensing emotions at first, then impressions, and eventually some direct thoughts if we concentrate. And that's why you always seem to know what the other is thinking, Ron said slowly. Why you finish each other's sentences. Why you always know where each other is. Harry nodded. We didn't tell you because Dumbledore advised discretion. And because we were still figuring it out ourselves. Ron was quiet for a moment, digesting this information. Is that why you've been having those special lessons with McGonagall? To learn about this bond thing? Yes, Hermione confirmed. And recently with Snape too, though those are specifically for occlumency, protecting our minds from external influence. Because someone might be trying to use your connection against you, Ron concluded, putting the pieces together. And you think it's the same person who's after the Philosopher's Stone? Harry was impressed by how quickly Ron grasped the situation. Exactly. And now we know they specifically asked Hagrid about me and about our connection. We need to tell a teacher, Hermione insisted. With Dumbledore away, it should be McGonagall. They found their head of house in her office, grading final exams with her usual stern efficiency. When they knocked, she looked up with surprise. Potter, Granger, Weasley. Shouldn't you be studying for your defense against the dark arts exam? Professor, it's important, Harry said urgently. It's about the Philosopher's Stone. McGonagall's quill fell from her fingers, splattering ink across the parchment she'd been marking. How do you know? We know someone's trying to steal it, Hermione interrupted. And we think they're planning to make their move soon, while Professor Dumbledore is away. McGonagall's nostrils flared. I don't know how you found out about the stone, but I assure you it is perfectly well protected. Now, I suggest you all go back to your dormitory quietly. But Professor, Harry persisted, I think they're trying to use he glanced meaningfully at her, our special connection to somehow gain access or information. Understanding flickered in McGonagall's eyes, but her resolve didn't waver. Mr. Potter, the protections surrounding the stone were designed by the greatest witches and wizards of our time, including Professor Dumbledore himself. They cannot be breached by exploiting any particular magical relationship. But Professor, Hermione began. That is enough, McGonagall said firmly. I know more about your situation than you realize, Miss Granger, and I assure you that precautions were taken. The stone is safe. Now, please focus on your exams and leave this matter to the staff. Defeated, they left her office, frustration simmering between them. She didn't believe us, Ron said as they climbed the marble staircase. Or at least, she doesn't think there's any real danger. She's wrong, Harry said grimly, rubbing his scar, which had begun to throb painfully again. Whoever's after the stone knows about our bond and has been trying to influence me through it somehow. Those visions of the third-floor corridor, the foreign emotions, it's all connected. We need to guard it ourselves, Hermione projected, her determination flowing through their bond. Tonight, Harry agreed silently. After everyone's asleep. Aloud, for Ron's benefit, Harry said, we'll take turns watching the third-floor corridor tonight. If someone tries to get past Fluffy, we'll be ready. Ron nodded, a mixture of fear and excitement on his face. I'm with you. But what exactly are we going to do if someone, especially a teacher, shows up? We'll figure that out when it happens, Harry said, though in truth, he had no idea. He only knew they couldn't stand by and let the stone be stolen, not when he felt so certain that disaster would follow if it fell into the wrong hands. The defense against the dark arts exam the next day was grueling, not because of its difficulty but because of the splitting headache that plagued Harry throughout. Professor Quirrell supervised, pacing between the desks in his characteristic nervous manner, his purple turban slightly askew. Every time the professor passed near Harry's desk, his scar flared with such intense pain that he could barely see the test paper. Through their bond, Hermione sent waves of concern and attempted comfort, but nothing seemed to help. It's never been this bad before, Harry projected, his mental voice strained even in thought. Maybe you should go to the hospital wing, Hermione suggested worriedly. No. We can't risk missing anything tonight. When the exam finally ended, Harry stumbled out of the hall, feeling as though his head might split open at any moment. Ron and Hermione flanked him, steering him toward a quiet alcove where he could collect himself. Mate, you look terrible, Ron said bluntly. What's going on? My scar, Harry managed, pressing his palm against his forehead. It's been hurting all year, but it's getting worse. Much worse. Does it happen around specific people? Hermione asked, her analytical mind already searching for patterns. Harry considered. It's strongest near the forest, and around Quirrell, strangely enough. Just now in the exam, it was almost unbearable. Quirrell? Ron repeated skeptically. The bloke's terrified of his own shadow. But something about Harry's observation triggered a cascade of connections in Hermione's mind. Harry could feel her thoughts racing through their bond, assembling pieces of a puzzle they hadn't realized was there. Quirrell was at the Quidditch match, she said slowly. When your broom was jinxed. Everyone was watching Snape because he was so obvious, muttering and maintaining eye contact. But Quirrell was there too. And he's the defense teacher, Harry added, catching her train of thought. He'd know all about jinxes. Plus he'd have a reason to know about the stone's protections, Ron pointed out. Hagrid said all the teachers helped guard it. The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. What if their suspicions of Snape had been a deliberate misdirection? What if Quirrell, timid, stuttering Professor Quirrell, was the one trying to steal the stone? We still watch the corridor tonight, Harry decided. But we keep a special eye out for Quirrell. As the day wore on, Harry's headache gradually subsided, but the sense of impending danger only grew stronger. By nightfall, as they sat in the Gryffindor common room waiting for their housemates to go to bed, all three were tense with anticipation. I've been thinking, Hermione said quietly, once only a few older students remained by the fire. If someone, Quirrell or whoever, knows about our bond, they might try to use it against us somehow. How? Ron asked. I thought you said it made you stronger, not weaker. It does, usually, Harry confirmed. But Snape warned us that magical connections can sometimes be exploited by someone skilled in legilimency, mind reading, basically. That's why we've been learning occlumency. So you think Quirrell might be a legilimens? Ron looked doubtful. I don't know, Hermione admitted. But we need to be prepared for anything. By midnight, the common room had finally emptied. Harry retrieved his invisibility cloak from his dormitory, and they huddled beneath it, carefully navigating the portrait hole. This is mental, Ron whispered as they crept through the darkened corridors. If we get caught. We won't, Harry assured him, though his own heart was racing. As they approached the third-floor corridor, Harry suddenly stopped, gripping Hermione's arm tightly. Someone's already been here, he whispered, pointing to the door that concealed Fluffy. It was ajar, a thin line of light visible around its edges. Could be Filch, Ron suggested hopefully. Filch wouldn't leave the door open, Hermione countered. Taking a deep breath, Harry pulled the cloak off and stuffed it into his pocket. There was no point in stealth now, whoever had gone through that door already knew they were coming. How do you know that? Ron asked, bewildered. Because they've been waiting for us, Harry said grimly. Or at least, for me. Before Ron could question further, Harry pushed the door open wider. The growls that greeted them confirmed Fluffy was still very much awake and on guard, all three massive heads snarling at the intruders. But something else caught their attention immediately. A harp lay on the floor near the three-headed dog, as if abandoned in haste. Someone was just here, Hermione whispered. They must have been playing music to put Fluffy to sleep, but stopped when they heard us coming. Harry reached into his pocket, producing a wooden flute Hagrid had given him for Christmas. I'm going to try to put him back to sleep. When I do, you two move the trapdoor and go through. I'll follow. Harry, Hermione began, concern flooding their bond. I'll be right behind you, he projected firmly. Trust me. He raised the flute to his lips and began to play. The notes that emerged were far from melodious, but the effect on Fluffy was immediate. The massive dog's eyelids drooped, its growls faded to snuffles, and slowly, it slumped to the ground, fast asleep. Ron and Hermione moved quickly to the trapdoor, pulling it open to reveal a dark, seemingly bottomless shaft below. Can't see the bottom, Ron reported nervously. How do we get down? I'll go first, Hermione decided. If it's safe, I'll call up to you. Before either boy could protest, she lowered herself into the opening and let go. They heard a muffled thump and then her voice echoing up from below. It's okay. There's a sort of plant thing to break the fall. Ron followed immediately. Harry, still playing the flute, backed slowly toward the trapdoor. Just as he reached it, a strange sensation swept over him, like invisible fingers probing at the edges of his mind. His scar exploded with pain, causing him to drop the flute. Fluffy stirred instantly, its eyes beginning to open. Harry had no choice, he jumped through the trapdoor just as the dog lunged, its jaws snapping where he had stood seconds before. He landed with a soft thump on what felt like a cushioned surface. Relief flooded through him as Hermione's worried face appeared in the dim light. Harry. Are you all right? I felt your pain, something's up there, he gasped, clutching his scar. Something tried to get into my mind. But before he could explain further, Ron's panicked voice cut through the darkness. Guys. The plant, it's moving. Harry suddenly realized what they had landed on, Devil's Snare, a magical plant they'd studied in herbology. Its tendrils were already wrapping around their legs, snaking up their bodies with surprising strength. Don't struggle. Hermione commanded. It will only kill you faster. Kill us faster. Ron squeaked, fighting harder against the creeping vines. Oh, now I can relax. Hermione closed her eyes, visibly forcing herself to remain calm. The plant's tendrils loosened around her, and she slipped through, landing on solid ground below. It's Devil's Snare, she called up to them. You need to relax. Harry followed her example, letting his body go limp despite every instinct screaming at him to fight. The plant released him too, and he fell to join Hermione. Ron, however, was in full panic, thrashing wildly as the plant constricted tighter around him. He's not listening. Harry said frantically. What kills Devil's Snare? It likes dark and damp, fire. Hermione exclaimed. But there's no wood, are you a witch or not? Ron bellowed from above, momentarily overcoming his terror. Right. Hermione fumbled for her wand, pointing it at the plant. Incendio. Flames erupted from her wand, and the Devil's Snare recoiled, releasing Ron, who fell through to join them, shaking and pale. Lucky you pay attention in herbology, he muttered, brushing remnants of the plant from his robes. They found themselves in a stone passageway that sloped downward, the only way forward. As they followed it, the sound of rustling and clinking grew louder. Sounds like wings, Harry observed as they reached the end of the passage. They emerged into a brilliantly lit chamber with a high, arched ceiling. Hundreds of small, jewel-bright birds fluttered above them, filling the air with their delicate wings. On the opposite side stood a heavy wooden door. Those aren't birds, Hermione realized, squinting upward. They're keys. Winged keys. Sure enough, each tiny flying object was actually a key with gossamer wings attached. Near the door hung 3 broomsticks, hovering at mounting height. One of them must fit the door, Harry said, examining the lock. We need to catch the right one. But there are hundreds. Ron protested. Hermione studied the lock carefully. Look for an old-fashioned silver one, probably large. Like the handle. They mounted the broomsticks, kicking off into the air. Harry, with his seeker's eye, spotted it first, a large silver key with bright blue wings, one already crumpled as if it had been caught and roughly handled before. There, he shouted, pointing. That one with the damaged wing. The key darted away as they approached, leading them on a wild chase around the chamber. Finally, Harry cornered it against the wall, trapping it between his palms with a satisfied grin. Back on the ground, he inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a click, and the door swung open. The key, released, fluttered away, now even more battered than before. The next chamber was so dark they could barely see. But as they stepped inside, light flooded the room, revealing an enormous chessboard. The pieces, carved from black and white stone, were taller than they were, imposing and silent. Now what? Hermione whispered. Obvious, isn't it? Ron said, suddenly animated. We've got to play our way across. It quickly became clear that this would be wizard's chess, where the pieces moved at command but could be violently taken in the process. Ron, the best chess player among them, took charge, assigning positions to Harry, Hermione, and himself. The game was brutal and tense. Stone pieces shattered as they were captured, raining debris across the checkered floor. Ron navigated with remarkable skill, sacrificing pieces strategically to protect Harry and Hermione while advancing their position. Finally, he made a difficult decision. There's no other way, he said grimly. I've got to be taken. No. Harry and Hermione shouted simultaneously. It's chess. Ron snapped. You've got to make sacrifices. I'll move, and the queen will take me. That leaves Harry free to checkmate the king. Before they could protest further, Ron stepped forward. The White Queen pounced, striking him hard across the head with her stone arm. Ron crumpled to the ground as the queen dragged him off the board. Harry moved mechanically to his designated square. Checkmate, he called, his voice hollow. The White King removed his crown, tossing it at Harry's feet in surrender. The remaining pieces parted, revealing the door to the next chamber. Hermione rushed to check on Ron, who lay unconscious but breathing steadily. He'll be all right, she reported, though her voice trembled. I'll stay with him. No, Harry said firmly. We go on together. We're stronger together, he added through their bond. Whoever's ahead, they know about our connection. They might be counting on separating us. Hermione hesitated, torn between staying with their injured friend and continuing with Harry. He needs help, she argued. We'll come back for him, Harry promised. Once we've stopped whoever's trying to steal the stone. Reluctantly, Hermione nodded. They propped Ron in a sitting position against the wall, making him as comfortable as possible before proceeding to the next chamber. A disgusting smell assaulted them as soon as they opened the door. A troll, even larger than the one they had faced on Halloween, lay unconscious on the floor, a bloody lump on its head. Glad we didn't have to fight that one, Harry muttered as they hurried past. The next obstacle was more subtle, a simple table holding 7 differently shaped bottles standing in a line. As they crossed the threshold, purple flames sprang up behind them while black flames blocked the doorway ahead. Snape's contribution, Hermione said, picking up a roll of parchment that lay beside the bottles. It contained a riddle, a logic puzzle that would identify which potion would allow them to proceed safely through the black flames. Hermione read the riddle several times, her brow furrowed in concentration. Harry felt her mind working through the problem, methodically eliminating possibilities until the answer became clear. Got it, she announced finally. The smallest bottle will get us through the black flames, toward the stone. Harry picked up the tiny bottle, examining its contents. There's barely enough for one swallow. They looked at each other, understanding the implication. Only one of them could go forward. You're the one who needs to go, Hermione said firmly. You're the one he wants. Harry knew she was right. Whoever awaited them in the final chamber, Quirrell, or someone else, had been targeting him specifically, trying to use their bond to manipulate events. Take the rounded bottle at the end, Hermione continued, indicating another potion. That one will let you go back through the purple flames to help Ron. Harry clutched the small bottle tightly. Hermione, if it's Quirrell, or anyone else, and they try to use our connection somehow. I know, she said, understanding his unspoken concern. I'll use the occlumency techniques. I won't let them in. They stared at each other for a moment, the weight of what might lie ahead hanging between them. Then, impulsively, Hermione threw her arms around him in a tight hug. Harry, be careful, she whispered. You too, he replied, returning the embrace. Through their bond flowed all the emotions too complex for words, fear, determination, and a fierce protectiveness that had grown between them since that first accidental magic 2 years ago. With a final nod, Harry raised the small bottle to his lips and drank. An icy feeling spread through his body, and he stepped forward into the black flames, unhurt. The last thing he saw before the fire obscured his vision was Hermione's pale face, her eyes wide with worry. The chamber beyond the flames was circular, with descending steps leading to a central platform. There stood the mirror of Ariste, its ornate frame gleaming in the torchlight. And before it, just as Harry had suspected, stood Professor Quirrell, without a trace of his usual stutter or nervous trembling. I wondered if I'd be seeing you here, Potter, Quirrell said, his voice cold and steady, nothing like the timid tones he used in class. You, Harry said simply, his scar throbbing painfully in the man's presence. Not Snape. Quirrell laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Yes, Severus does seem the type, doesn't he? Next to him, who would suspect P.P. Poor, St. stuttering P. Professor Quirrell? With a snap of his fingers, ropes appeared from thin air, wrapping themselves tightly around Harry, binding his arms to his sides. Now, wait quietly, Potter. I need to examine this interesting mirror. As Quirrell turned his attention to the mirror of Ariste, Harry fought against his bonds, trying to focus through the searing pain in his forehead. Through their connection, he could feel Hermione's worried presence. She had sensed his danger and was struggling to maintain the mental shield Snape had taught them, preventing whoever was using his mind from accessing hers as well. I see the stone, Quirrell murmured, staring into the mirror. I'm presenting it to my master, but how do I get it? Use the boy, came a high, cold voice from nowhere and everywhere at once. Harry froze. There was someone else in the room, but where? Quirrell turned to Harry, his eyes gleaming with malice. Yes. Potter, come here. The ropes fell away, and Harry found himself walking forward against his will, as if pulled by invisible strings. As he approached the mirror, his scar exploded with such intense pain that he nearly blacked out. Look in the mirror, Quirrell commanded. Tell me what you see. Harry stood before the mirror of Ariste, bracing himself for whatever might appear. But instead of the shared vision he and Hermione had seen at Christmas, their older selves with their bond visible between them, he saw only his own reflection. Then, incredibly, his mirror self smiled, reached into its pocket, and pulled out a blood-red stone. The reflection winked and returned the stone to its pocket, and as it did so, Harry felt something heavy drop into his real pocket. He had gotten the Philosopher's Stone. Well? Quirrell demanded impatiently. What do you see? Harry's mind raced, searching for a convincing lie. I see myself shaking hands with Dumbledore, he invented. I've won the House Cup for Gryffindor. Quirrell cursed, shoving him aside. Useless. But the high voice spoke again, sending chills down Harry's spine. He lies. He lies. Potter, tell the truth. Quirrell shouted. What did you see? The high voice spoke once more. Let me speak to him, face to face. Master, you are not strong enough. Quirrell protested. I have strength enough. For this. To Harry's horror, Quirrell began unwrapping his purple turban. As the cloth fell away, he turned slowly on the spot, revealing what should have been the back of his head. Instead, a face, the most terrible face Harry had ever seen, projected from Quirrell's skull. It was chalk white with glaring red eyes and slits for nostrils, like a snake. "Harry Potter," it whispered. "See what I have become? Mere shadow and vapor, forced to share another's body. But there have always been those willing to let me into their hearts and minds, and you, with your special connection, have been most useful indeed." Realization dawned on Harry with sickening clarity. Voldemort. Yes, the face confirmed. Your unusual bond with the Mudblood girl has provided me with opportunities. Glimpses into your mind, your movements, your plans. Harry felt as though ice had replaced the blood in his veins. The visions. The emotions that weren't mine. That was you? Your defenses are weak, Potter, Voldemort hissed. Your mind opens to hers so readily, and through that opening, I found my way in. Not fully, not always, but enough. Enough to manipulate, to observe. Harry instinctively strengthened his occlumency shields, feeling Hermione doing the same on her end of their connection. Their bond hummed between them, stretched thin but unbroken. Your connection intrigues me, Voldemort continued. Such bonds are rare, powerful. Dangerous. Perhaps, before I kill you, I should see just how deep it goes. Without warning, a force like a battering ram slammed into Harry's mind. Unlike Snape's legilimency, which had been precise and controlled, this was brutal, tearing through his mental defenses with savage strength. Harry dropped to his knees, clutching his head as Voldemort forced his way deeper, searching for the thread that connected him to Hermione. Through their bond, Harry felt Hermione's panic as the invasion reached the connection between them. "He's trying to use me to hurt you," she projected frantically. "Block him." Harry responded, fighting to reinforce his own shields. Close the connection. But they had never tried to sever their bond before, had never wanted to. For 2 years it had been a constant presence, a comfort, a strength. Neither knew how to close that channel completely. Voldemort's presence slithered along their connection, a cold, alien force probing at the warm, familiar bond. Harry felt him reaching for Hermione's mind, using their connection as a bridge. "Fascinating," Voldemort whispered, his red eyes gleaming with cruel interest. "The girl feels you now, doesn't she? Your pain, your fear. Tell me, Potter, what happens when I do this?" A new agony erupted in Harry's scar, different from the physical pain. This was magical. Voldemort was attempting to corrupt their bond itself, pouring his own dark magic into the channel between them. Harry felt Hermione scream through their connection as the foreign magic reached her. Their bond, normally warm and golden in his mind's eye, began to darken, tendrils of something black and oily spreading along it. "Harry." Hermione's mental voice was faint, distorted. "Something's wrong, I can't." Their connection flickered like a candle in the wind, threatening to extinguish completely or, worse, transform into something twisted and wrong. In that moment of crisis, Harry understood what he needed to do. Instead of fighting to maintain their bond or trying to sever it, he would use it, channel his own magic through it, just as they'd practiced with McGonagall, but with a new purpose. "Hermione," he called, gathering his magic. "Together, like we practiced." Understanding flashed between them. Despite the distance, despite Voldemort's intrusion, their bond remained. Different, perhaps, from what it had been before, but still theirs. Harry felt Hermione marshalling her own magic, syncing it with his. As Voldemort pushed harder, trying to corrupt or sever their connection, they pushed back, not against each other, but in concert, their magic flowing in the same direction. The result was explosive. A surge of combined power rushed through their bond, purifying it of Voldemort's taint. The force of it knocked Harry backward, breaking Voldemort's mental grip on him. "What is this magic?" Voldemort hissed, genuine surprise in his voice. Harry scrambled to his feet, the Philosopher's Stone still heavy in his pocket. Their bond hummed with renewed strength, cleaner and brighter than before. "Stop him!" Voldemort commanded Quirrell, who lunged at Harry. Quirrell's hands closed around Harry's throat, and then screamed in agony. His fingers blistered and burned where they touched Harry's skin, the flesh turning angry red and then a disturbing gray, as if turning to ash. "Master, I cannot touch him!" Quirrell cried, staring at his ruined hands. "Then kill him, fool!" Voldemort shrieked. Quirrell raised his wand, but Harry acted on pure instinct. He lunged forward, placing his hands directly on Quirrell's face. The effect was immediate. Quirrell howled in pain as his skin cracked and disintegrated beneath Harry's touch. Through their bond, Harry felt Hermione channeling her magic to him, strengthening whatever protection was causing Quirrell such agony. The combined force of their magic flowed through Harry's hands, accelerating the destruction of Voldemort's host. Quirrell stumbled backward, his face crumbling like dried clay. "Master," he wailed, his body literally falling apart before Harry's eyes. In his final moments, Quirrell's body disintegrated completely, collapsing into a pile of ash on the chamber floor. A shadow rose from the remains, a shapeless, wraith-like form with burning red eyes. It howled in fury, rushing straight through Harry's body with the force of a freezing gale. The pain was beyond anything Harry had ever experienced. As darkness closed in around him, the last thing he felt was Hermione's frantic presence in his mind, trying desperately to hold onto him as consciousness slipped away. "Harry? Can you hear me?" The voice seemed to come from very far away. Harry struggled to open his eyes, finding them unexpectedly heavy. When he finally managed it, a blurry face with a long silver beard swam into view. "Professor Dumbledore," he mumbled, reaching instinctively for his glasses. Someone, Dumbledore himself, placed them in his hand, and the world came into focus. He was in the hospital wing, surrounded by what appeared to be half a candy shop's worth of sweets and cards. "Welcome back, my boy," Dumbledore said kindly, his blue eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles. "You've had quite an adventure." Memory flooded back, the underground chambers, Quirrell, Voldemort, the stone. "Sir." The Philosopher's Stone. Quirrell was trying to steal it for Voldemort. Harry tried to sit up but fell back, unexpectedly weak. "Calm yourself, Harry. You are a little behind the times," Dumbledore said gently. "Quirrell does not have the stone. In fact, the stone has been destroyed." "Destroyed? But Nicholas Flamel, you know about Nicholas?" Dumbledore looked pleased. "Nicholas and I have had a little chat, and agreed it's all for the best." As Dumbledore explained how Flamel and his wife had enough elixir stored to set their affairs in order before accepting death as the next great adventure, Harry's mind was racing ahead to more pressing concerns. "Sir, Ron and Hermione, both fine," Dumbledore assured him. "Mr. Weasley made an excellent recovery, and Miss Granger was quite unharmed physically, though rather distressed about you." Harry relaxed slightly, reaching instinctively through their bond for Hermione. To his surprise, he found nothing. Not the absence of connection, exactly, but a strange, cottony blankness where her presence should have been. Panic seized him. "Hermione, I can't feel her." "Our bond," Dumbledore raised a calming hand. "Peace, Harry. Your connection with Miss Granger remains intact. However, Madame Pomfrey has administered a mental quieting draft to both of you. A temporary measure," he added, seeing Harry's alarm. "To allow your minds to heal independently after the unusual strain they endured." "Voldemort," Harry said, the memory crystallizing. "He tried to use our bond. To corrupt it somehow." Dumbledore's expression grew grave. "Yes. A most concerning development. To use a natural magical connection as a weapon, it speaks to Voldemort's willingness to pervert even the most sacred magical phenomena for his purposes. But we stopped him, Harry said, remembering the surge of combined power that had purged Voldemort's influence from their bond. Hermione and I, we pushed back together. Indeed you did, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled with what looked like pride. And in doing so, you demonstrated the true power of your connection. Not merely as a channel for amplified spellcasting, but as a form of protection in itself. Harry considered this. It felt different afterward. Stronger, somehow. Cleaner. Magical bonds, like all living connections, can grow and evolve in response to challenges, Dumbledore explained. What Voldemort attempted was abhorrent, but your successful resistance may have strengthened your bond rather than weakened it. Will the potion wear off soon? Harry asked, uncomfortable with the cottony emptiness where Hermione's presence should be. By tomorrow morning, Dumbledore assured him. Madame Pomfrey was most insistent that both your minds needed uninterrupted rest. I believe her exact words were, teenage minds need boundaries, Albus, even magically connected ones. Despite everything, Harry smiled. Then another thought occurred to him. Sir, how did the stone get into the mirror? And how did I get it out? Ah, one of my more brilliant ideas, Dumbledore said, looking rather pleased with himself. Only someone who wanted to find the stone, find it, but not use it, could retrieve it from the mirror. A clever safeguard, though ultimately unnecessary given your timely intervention. They talked further, Dumbledore explaining how he had rushed back from London upon realizing he'd been lured away, and answering Harry's questions about why Quirrell couldn't touch him. Your mother's sacrifice left a mark of love, Harry, something Voldemort cannot understand or tolerate. Finally, as Dumbledore prepared to leave, Harry asked the question that had been nagging at him. Sir, there's something else. About our bond. Voldemort seemed interested in it. Almost like he wanted to study it before destroying it. Dumbledore paused, his expression troubled. That, Harry, is perhaps the most concerning aspect of this entire affair. Magical bonds like yours and Miss Granger's are exceedingly rare and poorly understood. In the wrong hands, such knowledge could be misused. You think he'll try again? To use our connection somehow? I think, Dumbledore said carefully, that you and Miss Granger must be extraordinarily vigilant about your mental defenses moving forward. Professor Snape, despite his challenging teaching methods, has much to offer in that regard. As Dumbledore finally took his leave, Harry sank back against his pillows, overwhelmed by everything he'd learned. The absence of Hermione's presence in his mind felt like a missing limb, uncomfortable and wrong. But Dumbledore's assurance that it was temporary comforted him. The next morning, Harry woke to the familiar and welcome sensation of Hermione's consciousness brushing against his own. Relief washed through him, immediately mirrored by her own. Harry. Her mental voice was the sweetest thing he'd ever heard. You're awake. And you're back, he replied, joy spreading through their renewed connection. Before he could say more, the hospital wing door burst open and Hermione herself rushed in, followed closely by Ron. She practically threw herself at Harry, hugging him fiercely while Ron hovered nearby, grinning despite his obvious concern. Blimey, mate, you gave us a scare, Ron said as Hermione finally released Harry. 3 days you've been out. 3 days? Harry repeated, shocked. Hermione nodded, perching on the edge of his bed. Madame Pomfrey said it was magical exhaustion. After what happened in the chamber. Through their bond, Harry felt her distress at the memory, the terrible sensation of Voldemort's presence invading their connection, the fear that their bond would be corrupted beyond repair. It's okay now, he projected soothingly. We stopped him. We're stronger now. Aloud, for Ron's benefit, he asked, what happened after I passed out? How did you get back through the flames? As Ron and Hermione filled him in on the aftermath, Dumbledore arriving just as Quirrell disintegrated, Hermione's frantic explanation about their bond being attacked, the rush to get Harry to the hospital wing, Harry marveled at how much had changed in just a few days. Their bond had faced its first true test against a force that sought to destroy or control it, and they had emerged victorious. But Voldemort was still out there, a wraith without a body but not without power. And he now knew about their connection, had even tried to use it against them. "The whole school's talking about it," Ron was saying, breaking into Harry's thoughts. "What happened down there with you and Quirrell? And there are rumors about you two as well," he added, gesturing between Harry and Hermione. "What kind of rumors?" Hermione asked sharply. Ron shifted uncomfortably. "Just stuff about how you collapsed at the exact same moment Harry did, even though you were 5 chambers away. And how you kept saying you could feel what was happening to him. People are putting things together." Harry and Hermione exchanged worried glances, both physical and mental. "So much for keeping our bond secret," Harry thought ruefully. "It was inevitable, I suppose," Hermione replied. "Too many people already suspected something." The remainder of the school year passed in a blur of recovery and readjustment. Harry was released from the hospital wing just in time for the end-of-year feast, where Gryffindor was awarded the House Cup thanks to last-minute points from Dumbledore, recognizing Harry's bravery, Ron's chess mastery, Hermione's logic and coolness under fire, and even Neville's courage in standing up to his friends. As the Hogwarts Express carried them back toward London, Harry, Ron, and Hermione shared a compartment, discussing the events of the year and their plans for the summer. "You must both come and stay with me," Ron said eagerly. "I'll send an owl." "Thanks," Harry said, genuinely touched. "I'll need something to look forward to." The thought of returning to Privet Drive was the only cloud on his horizon. As they neared King's Cross, Hermione grew increasingly quiet, both aloud and through their bond. Finally, as the train began slowing for its approach to London, she voiced the concern Harry had been feeling from her. "What's going to happen when we're apart?" she asked softly. "Our bond has never been tested over that kind of distance before." It was something Harry had been worrying about too. Their connection had become such an integral part of their lives that the prospect of separation, even temporary, was daunting. "We'll still feel each other," he assured her, hoping it was true. "Maybe not as clearly as when we're together, but the connection will still be there." Ron, who had become surprisingly supportive of their bond once he understood it better, nodded encouragingly. "And if it gets too faint, you can always write actual letters. You know, the old-fashioned way, with owls and everything." That brought smiles to both their faces, easing the tension as the train pulled into the station. As they prepared to separate on the platform, Ron to his waiting family, Hermione to her parents who stood a short distance away looking slightly overwhelmed by the magical chaos, Harry found himself reluctant to let go of their last moments together. "Write to me," he said to them both. "The Dursleys can't stop me from getting mail." "I will," Ron promised. Then, showing unusual perception, he moved away to give Harry and Hermione a moment alone. They stood facing each other, so many thoughts and emotions flowing through their connection that words seemed redundant. Yet Hermione spoke anyway, her voice soft but determined. "Whatever happens this summer, whatever distance separates us, it won't change anything," she said firmly. "Our bond survived Voldemort trying to corrupt it. It can survive a few weeks apart." Harry nodded, drawing comfort from her certainty. "The first thing that ever truly belonged to me," he said quietly, "wasn't my wand, or my broomstick, or even finding out I was a wizard. It was our connection. Finding you." Hermione's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You never have to be alone again, Harry." "Not really." She hugged him tightly, and through their embrace flowed all the reassurance and affection that had grown between them since that fateful day on the playground 2 years ago. When they separated, both wore small, private smiles. As Harry watched Hermione join her parents, he felt their bond stretch but hold firm. Even as she walked away, her presence remained in his mind, fainter than when they stood side by side, but unmistakably there. A warm certainty in the back of his consciousness that said, "You are connected. You are not alone. Whatever challenges the summer might bring, and Harry suspected there would be many, he would face them with the knowledge that somewhere across England, Hermione Granger shared his thoughts, felt his emotions, and waited for their reunion. Their bond, tested by fire, had emerged stronger than ever. And next year at Hogwarts, whatever came their way, they would face it together. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.